If a group of evil forces minions fails a task, do not scold them and send the same group on the same task again. Dark Lord Rule number 88. Who would have thought? No. I assumed that my speech at the council would be met with a strong reaction from the ambassadors, but I considered an immediate attack by warships unlikely. Nevertheless, they attacked. 5 cruisers flew to the station and began firing at my ship. By the way, it was quite a spectacle, and I was clearly convinced of the technological superiority of the replicators over the locals. The main caliber of their ships did not even set fire to the hull of the Super Hat Deck. The blocks simply absorbed all the energy transmitted to them, and now it remains to wait for the official response of each member of the council. Moreover, if I can assume the official statement of some of them, based on fragmentary knowledge of the canon, then the behavior of others is completely unpredictable. My thoughts were interrupted by a signal from the front door. Am I listening? Lord Baal, this is Commander Sinclair. Do you mind if I come in? Here's the reaction of the local command to our meeting on the bridge. Interesting. Of course. Come in, Commander. Open up. Good evening, Lord Baal. Sinclair smiled politely as he entered the cabin. I apologize for disturbing you. It's okay. You didn't disturb me. Would you like something to drink? I waved my hand in the direction of the minibar. No, I think I'll refuse. I'm still on duty. He shook his head. Well, as you wish. It's my job to suggest. I smile and settle more languidly into the chair, gesturing to the man towards the sofa standing nearby. Do you drink yourself? The officer said, sitting down and taking advantage of the opportunity to obtain information. I can drink, but I'm unlikely to enjoy it. Alas, the rule that alcoholic drinks are rarely tasty is not limited to just one particular planet. Ahem. Lord Baal, regarding the unfortunate misunderstanding with your ship, are you talking about the show the Dratzi cruisers put on? Yes. I hope you won't judge by this incident about... Oh, don't worry, Commander. A wide smile. I told you at the council that if anyone from the League of Non-Aligned Worlds wishes to declare war on us, I will gladly listen to them. But that didn't happen, did it? You're not at all worried that your ship was attacked? From what? It was quite funny. I moved my fingers slightly, stroking my beard. The man clearly didn't like the answer. He had a good command of his face, but the thought that he was being mocked still flashed through his mind. And to notice it, you didn't. Have to be a representative of the supercomputer race. What could be funny about an attack? The officer asked, but his intonation read, Do you find the death of hundreds of intelligent beings funny? The very fact of it, I do. Not show outwardly that I noticed the change in tone. Don't get me wrong, I do not consider you some kind of barbarians or lower forms of life. If so, I would simply not talk to you, but I shake my head. The level of your development, even purely technical, is so inferior to ours that you are not even capable of imagining it. Although you probably received a very good education. Dratzi. I pause, looking as if I am searching for words. Under no circumstances. Not at all. With all their desire. They could not cause any damage to my ship. With the same success, they could jump into space without spacesuits, with stone axes, and start pounding on its hull. The result would not have changed in the least. I know this, and that is the only reason the situation amuses me. So you won't bring it to direct conflict with the Dratzi? Sinclair asked hopefully, instantly throwing aside his recent irritation. Whatever one may say, I gave him food for thought, and when a person is busy with analytical work, emotions automatically recede into the background. Commander, I cannot speak for the Dratzi, but I assure you that I will not be the instigator of conflict. Although I am more than sure that similar incidents could be repeated by other species represented on Babylon 5. At least, that is the likely development of events. I understand. The officer nodded with a sigh. And thank you for your good intentions. You're welcome, Commander. You're welcome. In that case, I apologize again for disturbing you and allow me to take my leave. It's okay. See you at the council. Goodbye, Lord Baal. Sinclair went out the door and I thought, so why did he come? No, in theory it's clear. A new ambassador arrived at the station, and in the evening his ship was attacked. Who's to blame? Well, besides the attackers, it's obvious that the responsibility will also lie with the receiving party, which is Earth in the person of Sinclair. So he got tense. Logical. But since he probably already managed to contact his superiors, it means that, with a high degree of probability, Earth itself does not want to go into conflict, which, in general, is expected. The past demonstration should also set the brains of other races straight. Theoretically. Although if the Drazis bite the bit, we'll have to deal with their planet, and that means the murder of several billion. Well, an interesting philosophical problem. The logical analysis doesn't see any obstacles, but the moral one is in trouble. I need to think about it. Interlude. The council chamber was in a constant hubbub as ambassadors from all the races represented on the Babylon argued until they were hoarse over what decision to make regarding the scandalous statement of the representative of the new race. Only the ambassadors of Minbar, Narn, and Centauri remained silent, occasionally exchanging glances with slight anxiety. Commander Sinclair, having despaired of bringing the meeting to even a semblance of order, sat wearily, resting his head on his hand, staring at the table in front of him. It seemed that the argument had been going on for quite some time. Commander Sinclair, the communicator squeaked quietly. Ambassador Baal will be in the council chamber in a few minutes. The station commander perked up, looking around at the still quarreling representatives of the League Worlds, and picked up a massive hammer, raising it over the table. Strike. Nah. Sinclair's voice finally managed to break through the noise of the crowd, forcing them, if not immediately, to quiet down and pay attention to him. Having made sure that he was being listened to, the commander continued. We have gathered today to vote openly on the decision on the statement made by Ambassador Baal at the previous meeting of the council. I trust that all of you have had time to discuss the situation with your governments. The Drazi protest against such impudent behavior of the new ambassador. The representative of the above-mentioned jumped up from his seat. Our ships were destroyed, together with all the crews. We can't. Let me remind the ambassador and all the other members of the council. Lord Baal, who appeared in the doorway of the meeting room, made the Drazi ambassador fall, silent mid-sentence, and the other members of the League tensely follow him with their eyes. That the Drazi cruisers were the first to attack my ship. The Goa'uld smiled, amiably, making a short bow to the warlike representative of the League. Moreover, they attacked without even bothering to compare the level of technical development of our ships. But I do not take offense at such an obvious attempt at insult. Good afternoon, Commander. Baal bowed to Sinclair with a smile. Good afternoon, gentlemen ambassadors. Madam Lieutenant. Then he noticed Ambassador Kosh, who unexpectedly honored the council meeting with his presence, and, as was his custom, was standing unnoticed in the corner. And good day to you, my secretive friend. At the last words, Baal's smile became especially wide, and his bow was openly mocking, as if there was something between them that the others did not know about. Ahem. Lord Baal, said Sinclair, taking advantage of the fact that the Drazi had sat down in his seat with aloofness. We have already discussed this misunderstanding. Of course, Commander. Baal spread his hands. I simply chose to bring some clarity to the statement of the Drazi ambassador, nothing more. Of course. Ahem. So, as I said, I propose to vote, gentlemen ambassadors. I hope we will make the right decision. Sinclair's last words were heard only by the top of the council, who looked in bewilderment at the visibly tense commander. So let's vote, esteemed council. Lieutenant Ivanova rose from her chair next to Sinclair, looking around the room. Who is in favor of accepting... Lord Baal's proposal and allocating territory to the Goa'uld for the construction of an outpost? An oppressive silence fell over the council chamber, and not a single hand was raised in the air. Baal looked curiously at the silent ambassadors, then turned his gaze to Sinclair, who was gripping his hammer so tightly that his knuckles were white, and smiled, turning to Ivanova. "Madame Lieutenant, I believe the question should be asked a little differently. If you allow me." Ivanova nodded uncertainly. "Esteemed ambassadors who votes to refrain from any action against the Goa'uld Empire in connection with the construction of our outpost on the territory of your galaxy." There was a few seconds of silence, during which the Goa'uld representative stood with his arms crossed over his chest and his fingers stroking his beard. And then one by one, the hands of the ambassadors of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds began to rise. The last to vote was the Drazi ambassador, who glared at Baal with displeasure. "Well, the decision is unanimous." Sinclair breathed a sigh of relief. "The Earth Commonwealth is also refraining from taking active action on this issue. I support Commander Sinclair." Delenn immediately spoke up. "Lord Baal, Minbar will not interfere unless you invade the sovereign territories of the council members." Baal gave another bow with a smile. "The Centaur doesn't mind," Londo grumbled. "Narn also supports this decision." "Ambassador." G'Kar stood up, exchanging bows with Baal. "Ambassador Kosh, will the Vorlon also remain neutral, or was your decision different?" "Yes," came a short voice from the Vorlon's vocabulator, and the ambassador silently turned around, leaving the council chamber. "Michael, come in," Sinclair, sprawled tiredly on the sofa in his office, waved his hand clutching a cup of steaming coffee. "Would you like some coffee?" "Real coffee, not that chemical crap." "Wow, how did you?" There would be something to be surprised about. A small request to the right people, and they staked out a corner of the hydroponic garden for me. The harvest, of course, is no good, but you can indulge yourself occasionally. So will you? Of course, yes. Then pour it yourself. The coffee pot is on the table. Having waited until Garibaldi poured the coffee and having moved the chair back to front, sat down on it opposite, the commander took a sip from the cup and sighed wearily. "We need to resolve the issue with our new ambassador." "What's wrong with him?" "It seems he's shown quite clearly that you shouldn't joke around with the Goa'uld. Even Kosh got the message, I think." "Yes, he gave us some problems. It's good that his weapon destroys ships so well. Otherwise we would have had a lot of problems clearing the station's reception area of debris." Sinclair smiled sadly, finished his coffee in one gulp, putting the cup on the floor. "Well, he was within his rights, strictly speaking. Although, to be honest, he also bothers me." "Okay, all this is poetry. But you understand that despite the unanimous consent of the Council, the League will not accept his statement." "Of course I understand. But there have always been and will always be provocations. Just remember Londo and G'Kar, they're always barking. And we still haven't found out who started the mess at Regish 3, and who then made it so that both sides suffered. And then there's his huge ship. I'm not even talking about the effect of its gravity on the station, which, by the way, should have moved us out of geostationary orbit long ago," Sinclair thought. "I wonder why that didn't happen." "Ahem. But his ship will be like a red rag to the other races on Babylon. And what do you suggest?" "Well, in theory, this is a question of station safety." "Hey, Jeffrey, don't even think about it." Garibaldi jumped up, waving his free hand in front of him for emphasis. "But, look, you know me. I can talk to Londo on a first-name basis. After all, I know him and I understand more or less what's going on in his alcoholic head. I can chase G'Kar when he starts a fight in one of the taverns for fun. But Chief, I don't want to be the one held responsible if it suddenly turns out that the demand to remove the embassy ship from the station is a mortal insult and a violation of some traditions of the intergalactic empire." "Michael, no. And don't try to persuade me. It's up to me to decide the issue of his placement and the size of the delegation. I can also listen to the complaints of other ambassadors if they suddenly don't like such a neighborhood. But excuse me from demanding anything from this ambassador." "Damn, Garibaldi," the commander grimaced. "Thank you very much. I always knew that I could rely on you in a difficult situation." The man chuckled sarcastically and waved his hand in resignation. The council, surprisingly, went according to a favorable scenario. All races unanimously decided not to react to my statement at all, unless I invade the sovereign territories of council members. Well, that was expected. The demonstration of the capabilities of my technology was quite spectacular, and it said a lot to those who know how to look, and even more so to see. The only question that still causes some tension is the true reaction of the Vorlon Empire. As far as I know the canon, these secretive comrades never say or do anything directly and openly without a couple dozen double meanings, omissions, etc. This means that you still need to be prepared for checks from both them and their followers. Am I listening? The silence in the apartment was broken by the sound of a call from the terminal. Having accepted it, I saw the already familiar face of the head of security. "Good afternoon, Lord Baal. I hope I haven't disturbed you." "Not at all, Mr. Garibaldi." I smile. "Did you want something?" Ahem. Since the council voted to accept your application, I assume you will remain on Babylon 5 as the official representative of your people." "That's right. I will be representing the Goa'uld Empire as an ambassador. Is there a problem with that?" "Oh no, no problem. I just wanted to know how many people—" "Ahem," he paused. "How many representatives will be on your diplomatic mission?" I feign interest. "And what size is a typical embassy? I understand that we are on a space station, and the resources of your life support system are clearly not unlimited." Yeah. It's funny, but it seems that Garibaldi was just as nervous about communicating with me as Ivanov was about my appearance on the bridge. Am I that scary? Or is this anxiety due to the innate paranoia of the security chief at the sight of an ambassador whose ship, hanging near the station, is capable of blowing it to smithereens with a couple of shots? Most ambassadors arrive with an assistant, and the cabins are designed for exactly this composition of the mission. I pretend to be thoughtful, but I immediately remember Ambassador Kosh, who flew to the station alone. "Of course," Garibaldi put his hands in front of him. "If this contradicts some traditions of your race, we are ready to meet and discuss the details in more detail. After all, this is an international station, and customs can be extremely different. There's nothing worse than an accidentally unleashed war due to a simple misunderstanding." "Yes, perhaps neither you nor we need a repeat of that awkward incident between the humans and the Minbari." I shake my head with a slightly sympathetic smile. "In any case, no special requests will follow from me, Mr. Garibaldi. At the moment, I will represent the Goa'uld delegation alone. However, it is quite possible that in some time, an assistant will come to me. But now there is no point in worrying about it." "Yes, I understand. Well, then I have no more questions." Garibaldi hesitantly made something resembling a short bow, although it was clear from his appearance that there were still questions. But he clearly did not consider himself entitled to resolve them himself. "It was nice talking to you," I say, also slightly bowing my head with a welcoming smile. Having finished the communication session, I lean back in my chair, thoughtfully looking around the room. Standard, albeit expensive furniture, a kitchenette, a sleeping area. But the ambassadors' cabins, as far as I remember, were furnished according to the wishes and traditions of their people. At least, G'Kar definitely had something like that. And why am I worse? The younger ones on the ship obediently bustled about, carrying out the command. And 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, they reported readiness. So, there's no one in the corridor now. Temporarily block the surveillance cameras. Well, let's get started. I get up from my chair, going out to the middle of the room, and the surrounding interior objects with a quiet, grinding hum begin to disappear in the rays of blue light. Interlude. What the hell? Commander Sinclair stopped in shock, emerging from around the corner into one of the corridors of the embassy sector. Although at the moment it was problematic to call it a corridor, most of the space was literally filled with furniture, leaving only a narrow gap for passage so that one person could squeeze through, no more. Looking more closely, Sinclair was surprised to recognize in the objects parts of the standard decoration of embassy cabins, which were usually replaced with something more in line with the national traditions of diplomats after the delegation moved in. But as far as he could remember, the only new ambassador on the Babylon was Baal, and he hadn't applied for a refurbishment. He didn't seem to care at all how it was furnished. Squeezing between the wall and the couch, he stopped at the closed door to the cabin, a small patch of free space in front of it. Sinclair glanced at the clutter of furniture again, a little hesitantly, and touched the doorbell sensor. "Yes?" came the voice of Baal. "Lord Baal, this is Commander Sinclair. I apologize for disturbing you, but I believe we need to discuss one matter." "Yes, of course, Commander. Come in." The door opened with a quiet beep and Sinclair stepped inside, freezing in shock the next moment. "Lord Baal, what is this?" "What do you mean?" "What is this, Commander?" Turning to the newcomer, the gold ambassador placed some crystal on a massive table, dully gleaming with gold trim. Just trim. It can't really be made of gold, right? "Well, all of this." Sinclair looked around the room, which had changed almost beyond recognition. Where was Ambassador Gakar, who had only requested a special bed replacement of the light sources with crimson red ones and brought some personal items, apparently, half of ritual? Purpose. It was easier to say that Lord Baal had not changed. Strictly speaking, only the walls, floor, and ceiling remained from the original furnishings, and even then they were decorated with carved panels and inserts of metal plates. And gold here? Covered with symbols vaguely familiar to the commander. In general, now the cabin gave the impression of some kind of throne room, rather than a simple living space. At least the chair, which the ambassador gestured to Jeffrey, inviting him to sit, looked no less majestic than some ancient throne. That," Baal said with a smile, waiting for the guest to sit down in the offered place. "Just a small rearrangement of furniture. It will be more comfortable for me. By the way, Commander Sinclair." The gold settled himself on his side of the table with a friendly smile that was already starting to make the man nervously itch. "Since you have come to see me so conveniently, perhaps you can tell me who to contact to have everything cleared away." He moved his fingers in the air, nodding towards the door to the cabin. "That. Otherwise, I'm afraid the corridor has become a little cramped." Of course, Ambassador. I will send service workers to you. They will move the unnecessary furniture to the warehouse." "That's wonderful. I'm very grateful to you. By the way, you seemed to want to talk to me about something, didn't you?" Yes, Ambassador." Funny, but Sinclair shifted in his monumental chair, trying to get more comfortable. "I would like to discuss your ship with you." What's wrong with it?" Baal raised his eyebrows in surprise. "If you're still talking about the same Drazi attack, then the ship is not damaged. It does not require repairs, but I am extremely grateful for your concern." The man stumbled at this interpretation of his words, but soon managed to overcome his surprise and continued. "I'm talking about something different. You do understand that an act similar to what the Drassis did is quite likely from other representatives of the League?" "Commander Sinclair, if the representatives of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds decide to commit suicidal and frankly stupid actions, who am I?" He spread his hands with a regretful look to stop them from making mistakes. "We have already discussed this point, and I gave you my word that I will not take inadequate countermeasures." But honestly, Commander, they are not children anymore. They are civilizations that have entered space. Surely they must have an understanding, at least superficial, of the scale of the universe and the possible consequences of their actions. If that were the case, Sinclair sighed, there would be no need for Babylon 5. But that's not my point. I would like, if it would not be impolite on my part, to ask you to somehow resolve the issue with your ship. Not to mention the fact that such a large object will complicate navigation for incoming and outgoing ships. It will, with an extremely high probability, serve as a, irritant to other races. Baal leaned back in his chair, rubbing his beard with his fingers. I suppose I can meet you halfway. After all, the other ambassadors don't keep their ships at the station. The one you have in the dock will be quite enough for me. Thank you, Lord Baal. Sinclair breathed a sigh of relief, relaxing in his chair. In that case, Commander, the communicator beeped. Yes, Mr. Garibaldi, I'm listening. Could you come to customs post number 4? There is a problem. Well, what else? I'll be right there. Sighing heavily, the commander spread his hands guiltily, looking at Baal. Please forgive me, but I have to leave you. Not a moment's peace. The man muttered the last words under his breath, getting up from the table. I understand you perfectly. The ambassador nodded with a smile. If you need any help, I'm at your service. Thank you, but I hope we can handle it ourselves. The commander grimaced as he left the cabin and looked longingly along the corridor, squeezing along the wall to the elevator. Having seen Sinclair off with his eyes, I couldn't help but grin. It seemed that the commander really was wrapped up in his work beyond measure. Otherwise, how could I explain that? He hadn't paid any attention to the moment when and how the furniture had been carried out from my cabin, and at the same time where the new furniture had appeared on the station. No. It's logical that he personally doesn't deal with such minor matters, leaving it strictly to the supply service. But still, I drummed my fingers on the tabletop and turned on the communications terminal. I wonder if ambassadors can communicate directly with Babylon's senior officers. Ivanova is listening. It looks like they can. Madame Lieutenant, I smile, even without the video connection, imagining the expression on Ivanova's face, who seemed irritated by this manner of address. I hope I haven't disturbed you too much, Lord Baal? No, everything is fine. How can I help you? Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for your hospitality. No need to thank me, Ambassador. After all, this is a diplomatic station. Yes, but in any case, please accept my gratitude. But actually, that's not exactly what I wanted to say. According to the agreement with Commander Sinclair, I need to send my ship away from the station. In connection with this, I would like to ask you for permission to take off. So as not to interfere with your flight schedule. Of course, Lord Baal. The clicking of keys was heard from Ivanova's side, and after a few seconds the woman continued. We have free slots in the schedule in 2 minutes. Half. An hour and tomorrow. I suppose the first option won't suit you so. Oh no, Madam Lieutenant. The next flight will suit me just fine. If you allow me, of course. But, of course, Ambassador, you can take off at that time. I will inform the flight control service. Thank you. Is that all? Or do you have any other questions? Oh, it's a mere trifle, to be honest. I smile again. Could you send someone from the supply service to take the furniture from my cabin to the warehouse? Because, the corridor has become a bit cramped. Yes. Of course, Lord Baal. Thank you again. In that case, I have no more questions. Having received permission from Ivanova to take off, after 1 minute and 15 seconds, obeying the given command, the Super Hat Deck moved from the station towards the transition zone. Pedantically, exactly 2 minutes later, the ship opened its own transition zone near the stationary one and went into hyperspace. Well, for me, the Teltuck in the hangar of the Babylon 5 and the module left by the main ship, a hyperdrive hidden under the invisibility field, a chair for me, and a teleportations device are quite enough. For insurance in an emergency, it is quite enough. Chapter 5. The grey everyday life of Babylon. Being the sincere embodiment of evil, I will dress in light and bright colors clothes, not forgetting to smile politely. Dark Lord Rule, not 29. Having finished bringing the allocated cabin into a more livable state, I cast a satisfied glance around the room and go out into the corridor. Here the support workers sent by Ivanova are already bustling about, judging by the obscene remarks reaching my ears, trying to figure out how to clear the cluttered corridor of furniture without creating additional problems with movement. Well, yes, the double bed could also be the cause of their discontent. It's not every day that you have to try to squeeze such a colossus through the relatively small doors of an elevator cabin. With a polite smile, I let 2 loaders pass, carrying some semblance of a wardrobe, and head in the opposite direction for a walk around the station. Information from the younger ones is one thing, but it is also worth taking a look at the local color for yourself. I remember that in the central part of the station, in the park and recreation area, there were local entertainment establishments, and the map confirmed this, so we will go there. Oh, Ambassador, what a joyful meeting, I tell you. As soon as I stepped out into the open air, looking at the farmland of the green zone of Babylon 5 spreading out below me, and above me too, by the way, the Centauri, Ambassador Londo Mallory literally flew out to meet me from one of the entertainment establishments, swaying slightly, holding a glass of something clearly alcoholic in his hand, as was his usual habit. Ambassador Mallory, I smile. You are right, a pleasant meeting. I just wanted to dispel my boredom, and at the same time study this wonderful station better, since they have done me the kindness of providing me with housing here. Not another word, the Centaurian exclaimed pathetically, waving his glass, almost spilling the drink on the people passing by. Such an important matter as the survey of the station simply must begin with local establishments for rest of soul and body, and I can be an excellent guide for you on this journey. I'll be grateful to you. I give Londo a half bow. I just hope that our excursion won't end with just entertainment venues. Lord Baal, believe me, my experience is not small. Londo confidentially moved closer to me, exuding the smell of alcohol. The most productive negotiations and the most important issues simply must be conducted in places like these. Please. Waving his hand with a glass, he invitingly pointed to the entrance to the neighboring building. The establishment turned out to be a rather respectable restaurant, not up to the highest level, but quite worthy of a visit by 2 ambassadors. However, I suppose there could not have been any other establishments in this part of the station. Calling the waitress who ran up to him in a warning manner, Londo made an order and led me deeper into the room, heading towards one of the tables. The place turned out to be a cozy nook, separated by translucent fabric partitions, which wonderfully concealed the outside noise of the establishment. Mallory comfortably settled down on one of the sofas, leaning back and closing his eyes with pleasure, listening to the musical accompaniment. I chuckled and settled down opposite, and a few seconds later the same waitress floated in, placing a large tray filled with snacks and drinks on the table, with the latter clearly in greater abundance. Londo as always, huh? Or is this his method of working? After all, by loosening the tongue of the interlocutor, you can find out a lot of useful information. Ambassador, the Centauri began, sighing blissfully. Let me first of all warmly welcome you to Babylon 5 and offer my heartfelt apologies for such an ugly incident that occurred due to the unreasonable behavior of the Drazi. Oh, Ambassador Mallory, don't worry about it. Commander Sinclair and I have already settled this misunderstanding. You're right. Their behavior was extremely difficult to call reasonable. In any case, Lord Baal, The man filled 2 glasses from a slightly dusty, ancient-looking bottle, handing one of them to me. As one of the members of the council, I am simply obliged to take care of the peace and peaceful resolution of problems that arise with the participation of, ward states. Raising his glass, the Centauri ambassador gave me a ceremonial bow, only miraculously not spilling the drink. In that case, Ambassador, I stand up to greet him, also raising my glass. I accept your apology. There's nothing to worry about, of course, unless they decide to declare war on our empire. Saluting with my glass, I put on an anticipatory smile on my face, downing the drink in. 1 gulp. Did I smile that terribly? No. Londo controlled himself, only shuddering slightly, but then smiled back and drank his portion. That would be extremely unwise on their part, I believe. Pouring himself another drink, the ambassador regained his composure and, relaxing a little, leaned back on the sofa again. In any case, I am very glad that you did not bring the matter to an open conflict. Drazi, the Centauri moved his fingers in front of him, are an unrestrained people. Aggressive. This always causes more problems than advantages, and when it manifests itself in a species that has gone into space. You are right. Our empire has known many examples of such situations, and many of them ended extremely badly for the participants. By the way, could you dispel my curiosity? Well, so the attempts to extract information begin? The Centauri Republic is an ancient state. Londo straightened up slightly. But even so, I find it difficult to imagine what it's like to be part of an empire that occupies not just many systems, but galaxies. Oh, nothing special, really. There's just more bureaucratic red tape and more varied resorts. I grin. Yes, replicators are such bureaucrats. Well, such bureaucrats. Not a single step without a report, let alone how many of them there are. But I suppose this requires a serious organization to control such a territory. That's right. I take a sip from my glass. But the system has been in place for a long time and works perfectly. But distances, different galaxies. Even in neighboring systems, you can't always keep track of everything that's happening. We'll make it. The trick is in good management. I smile. Although I must admit things aren't as bad for your countries as they could be. We're doing our best. The Centaurian raised his glass. To the bureaucrats, may they be damned. For this inevitable evil. I continue to smile broadly and finish my drink together with the ambassador. Tell me, Ambassador. A new portion of alcohol is poured into the glasses. It is noticeable that the ambassador is quite tipsy, apparently having started drinking long before our meeting. How do they relax in your empire? Relaxing? I raise an eyebrow. In different ways, I suppose, like everyone else. Some are interested in the arts, some go into research, many travel, and some, I raise my glass, prefer the more mundane joys of life. And understand by that what you will. Heh. Oh, yes, drink and women are true bliss for a true connoisseur. Londo sighed dreamily. Interesting. I suppose Londo, having met me in the park area, decided to improvise and try to extract some information or benefit for his people. But the conversation is clearly not going well for him. It is obvious that he wants to think about work issues the last thing in the world. There is something like that in the canon. It seems that around this time he should have had an extremely stormy relationship with one of the dancers. Our peoples, Ambassador, I lean back on the sofa, have much in common. Believe me, I have seen many civilizations, and no matter what they are, crawling, running, flying, or even clots of intelligent mucus in one form or another, they all have the same needs and desires. It seems there is harmony in the universe. It's not a sin to raise a glass to that. To the harmony of the universe. An excellent toast. Another hour passes in this practically meaningless conversation. Questions about nothing are replaced by attempts to find out some information about the new player in the political arena. And all this takes place against the background of libations. Either Londo thinks better this way, or he still hopes to get me drunk and loosen my tongue. I wonder if the other ambassadors will also establish informal communication. Certainly not Kosh, Lord Baal. Londo looked sadly at me as I drank another glass, which had no effect on my well-being. I apologize, but it seems I have drunk too much today, and will not be able to continue our tour of the station at a decent level. I hope you will not be offended by the suggestion to continue some other time. I would be happy to show you many wonderful places of Babylon 5. Oh, don't worry, Ambassador Malari. Our conversation gave me sincere pleasure. Yeah, and especially your attempts to give drink to a creature that basically can't be given drink. And I gladly accept your offer of a new meeting. Thank you, Lord Baal. Londo tried to get up from the couch but lost his balance and sat back down. Phew. I think I'll sit for a little while longer. And how is he still able to stand on his feet? He muttered the last part of the phrase under his breath, but I still heard it. Until next time, Ambassador Mallory, I bow to him, heading towards the exit of the private office. And yes, it's simple. I turn around. I'm simply physically incapable of getting drunk. So I took a walk around the station. Yeah, no. Londo is definitely a strange character. How he manages to fulfill the duties of an ambassador with such a lifestyle is beyond comprehension. Although, maybe the question is in the mentality of the race? Okay, that's all poetry. I go outside from the restaurant and look around. In general, everything is clear. Here at the station, there is a food and recreation area, so to speak. A little further and to the right, already on the wall, you can see something like a vast park labyrinth with many secluded gazebos and nooks. And next to it, there is a sports section for sports that require a lot of space. Another 2 hours passed in a leisurely stroll through the station's green zone. I didn't meet any more ambassadors or anyone else who wanted to get to know me. The crowd in this part of Babylon 5 was quite trustworthy and decent, so there were no adventures. In general, looking at the layout of the Babylon, I began to clearly understand that the Minbari really had a hand in its creation. I understand that this is an object that provides for long-term, if not almost permanent residence of a lot of people. But the rest area of 2/3 of the station, this part of the project definitely did not belong to human engineers. Especially if you remember the architecture of their own ships, especially military ones, especially in terms of aesthetics and free space. Contrary to my expectations, none of the ambassadors of the high races, except for Londo Mollari, expressed a desire to establish a closer acquaintance. At least, none of them came to visit me on a friendly visit. And during my walks around the station, I only ran into Kosh, who was mysteriously walking somewhere. However, he did not approach me either, although after my antics in the corridor, I was a little afraid of his reaction. Well, if the mountain won't come to Mohammed doesn't care. He'll find something to do. For example, analyzing the available information and starting to develop the territories. Not that I hadn't been doing this before, but now it was possible, so to speak, to concentrate, including emotionally. The system's planets were still far from being processed, but I already had some amount of conditionally free resources. For the stated scale, this was a drop in the ocean, but a completely acceptable start for a research company. I grabbed a lot for myself, but I didn't have any precise data on its contents. The territory needed to be reconnoitered, both in general and for minerals. Building an outpost, or seriously, a military-industrial complex of my empire, by trial and error, is clearly not the best idea. And that's not even counting the chances of running into local aborigines, whom the inhabitants of this corner of the galaxy don't know about yet, but who could well compete, even with the Vorlons, although the latter is unlikely. Having drawn up a map of the territory designated by me as an outpost of the Empire, I evenly outlined several targets for primary exploration, mainly stars about which the existence of an extensive planetary family is already known, which means a large assortment of natural conditions and the likelihood of stumbling upon resource-rich planets or asteroid fields. Several dozen Klotz modules separated from the silvery ball of the planet due to the layer of swarming replicators, and as they moved, they gathered into small ships. A reactor, a hyperdrive, a camouflage system, and a small base number of spiders to begin development in case something especially valuable was discovered. Miniature terraformer scouts of sorts. For local civilizations, the vast areas of the territory I have chosen are still a serious obstacle to control and communications. And with the advanced hyperdrives of the Asgards, this is already a simple and routine task. Now the main thing is that the scouts, based on the results of whose searches full-fledged blanks of industrial and mining complexes will then be sent, do not stumble upon aggressive natives. And if in the case of underdeveloped civilizations everything is obvious, they can simply be ignored. They will not be able to see what is happening on neighboring planets anyway. Then in the case of worlds that have already entered or are entering the space era, everything is not so clear. You will have to work with them individually, deciding which path of communication to choose. Or maybe it is even easier to simply destroy them to avoid problems in the future. It is strange, but in this case, morality and logic seem to have come to an agreement, and I did not feel any contradictions, as with the Dratzi. The ships dove into hyperspace windows and the first rays of the nascent web designed to remove the fog of war appeared on my mental map. The task is not quick, even for replicators with engines capable of crossing the entire galaxy from one end to the other in a couple of hours, but I am in no hurry. After all, according to calculations, even the existing system will take me more than 1 year to develop. Unless, of course, I build a time control device, but that requires neutronium, which is not yet available. That's another problem. And I had no luck with Quantum 40 either. Contrary to hopes, it only resembled Nequadria, having several common physical properties, but in reality, it turned out to be a completely different substance. Of course, there were hopes that the technologies known to me could be adapted to the new basis, and in some ways they had already been confirmed by practice, but full-fledged. Research required not so much time and computing power as raw materials, and Quantum 40 was considered a rare raw material for a reason. In addition, the design of replicators is really not very suitable for mining operations. It's like with ants. A person can dig up and throw away several dozen square centimeters of soil with a shovel in a split second, while hard-working ants need orders of magnitude. More time to drag the same volume. The same is true for replicators. There are many of them. They work tirelessly, harmoniously, and very organized. They are able to dig through any rock of any strength and operate in any conditions, but their scope is small, and the same Asgard ray is not a panacea. For a jewelry transfer, it needs to know all the parameters of the object, and it eats up an unreasonably large amount of energy for use as an excavator. Here we can also add that you can't make a replicator block from ordinary iron ore, a normal block. This means that the ore still needs to be processed, then alloyed, and what to alloy with? Rare earth metals, synthesized compounds, semiconductors. And this is all a very rough and primitive picture, however. Even from it, it is clear that replicators buried in the ground alone are not enough for their active reproduction. Processing and production base is needed, in conditions where the priority goal is to increase numbers, and right now the younger ones have exactly this goal, diverting resources to extracting a rare element, and experimenting with it is simply not rational. It's a pity that my kind of replicators didn't have access to the technologies of the ancients. The possibilities of the same zero-point modules seem very tempting, even according to fragmentary information, and energy is the basis for effective work. And I'm not even talking about the rest of the wealth of possibilities. But alas, we'll have to make do with what we have. especially since I have certain doubts about such a deep correspondence of the laws of physics in the two universes. Interlude. Nelson. Entering the medical bay, Franklin looked around in confusion. It was late, but usually even then the duty light was on in the room. But now it was dark. Only the power diodes on several terminals flickered dimly. Vance? But even now there was only silence in response. My God. Looking around the room once again, the doctor managed to see the mutilated figure of Nelson, the archaeologist's assistant, coming out from behind a column. The man's chest was torn, and in the hole a strange growth was visible, coming straight out of his sternum. His left arm was missing, and in its place was the barrel of some kind of weapon growing straight out of his body. Nelson, what happened? Protect. The alien metallic voice echoed through the medbay. Nelson raised his hand and fired at Stephen. The energy discharge threw the man against the opposite wall. When did this happen? At night. He was discovered an hour ago. Was he badly hurt? He was stunned by bruises, bumps, and a headache. Sinclair breathed a sigh of relief. If Garibaldi allowed himself to make the usual jokes, then the doctor really was not very seriously injured, and his life was not in danger. Doctor, Hernandez allowed him to talk to him. It's too early for you to get up. The commander and the head of security entered the room just as Franklin was trying to get out of bed, buttoning his shirt as he went. The man was clearly swaying from weakness, but he stubbornly continued to move. I'm a doctor. I know what I'm doing. Oh, he didn't finish, frantically groping for the bed behind him. Although, on the other hand, Franklin sat up heavily. Do you remember what happened in the lab? Vaguely. But I noticed the design of Nelson's weapon. It reminded me of the organic artifacts we worked with. Organic? Garibaldi tensed. Did they pass customs? They told me that yes. Franklin now frowned, looking from the commander to the security guard and back. Check it out. Garibaldi nodded. Who is Nelson's employer? Who is he working with? Vance Hendricks. Is this the one who brought the artifacts? I wonder. Find out what you can. This Nelson guy looks dangerous, Sinclair muttered, and we don't know what we're dealing with. I'll interrogate him. If he brought these items, he must know at least something. Lieutenant. One of the bridge controllers perked up, noticing the sensor readings. Another energy surge. Sector 13, Level B. And that's not all. What else? Ivanova turned tensely to the man. The parameters have changed, and the pulse power has increased by 20%. More and more often, if its power continues to grow. Lieutenant, a graph of the change in the power of the shots with a forecast for the near future appeared on the screen. If this continues, it can burn out the entire station. Damn it. Commander Sinclair. Yes, Lieutenant. There's a problem. According to the sensors, each new attack from Nelson is more powerful than the previous one. If this continues, he'll destroy the entire Babylon. Got it. So we have to stop him on the first try. Following the first group of ships that left for space, the following ones set off. Let's be realistic. Searching such a huge area for useful resources and planets suitable for development can take a very long time, and without any guarantees of success. Therefore, almost all the resources mined so far were processed into replicators and sent out as scouts throughout the galaxy, leaving in place only the amount that allowed not to reduce the speed of development of this system, thanks to the fact that the process of managing the younger ones, even manually, did not take up all my attention, in parallel with how my ships were sent to furrow the expanses of the Bolshoi Theater. I was quite able to continue my familiarization walk around the station. It seems that there is some benefit. Some part of the consciousness still gazes at the sights. But if I come across something curious, then I can always change the vector of Attention! The recreation area was relatively studied. Later it will be possible to walk around the dens, play poker, get into a fight with a word, behave in full accordance with the image of a not very serious, but at the same time, confident in his abilities ambassador. Well, and the suspicions of an idly wandering ambassador will, I think, be much less than the same ambassador locked in his cabin and intensely pondering something. Protect. It seems that the game of civilization occupied my conscious attention to a greater extent than I thought, because only with the edge of my consciousness did I notice in the corridor along which my body was moving, some figure that impressively came out from around the corner and blocked the way. And the next moment, a bright discharge of unknown energy flashed in my direction. Commander Sinclair, good to see you. Have you resolved the problem you had yet? Lord Baal, the stunned commander dressed in some kind of body armor only from the local plasma weapon, stopped abruptly in the passage, lowering the barrel of his rifle in surprise. What? What are you doing here? This is dangerous. Dangerous? I feign a polite, surprised smile. Forgive me, Commander, I didn't know. I was just strolling around your wonderful station, looking at the sights, so to speak. Lord Baal? Following Sinclair, Garibaldi ran into the corridor with a detachment of guards, all armed and wearing bulletproof vests. Oh, Mr. Garibaldi, and you are here. I repeat, you have a wonderful station. The technical solution applied to your recreation area is simply magnificent. My respects to your engineers. A puzzled expression appeared on the face of the head of security. Oh, forgive me. You were in a hurry somewhere. I didn't want to disturb you in any way, so if you allow me, I'll continue my walk. I give a slight bow, retreating to the wall of the corridor. Ah, yes, of course, Ambassador. Thank you for such a flattering assessment of Babylon, the commander answered automatically, watching me go. There is nothing difficult in deservedly praising the intelligent, especially those who not only gather many races in one place, establishing a dialogue between them, but who are also ready to tolerate the customs of each species, no matter how eccentric they may seem. I smile, nodding my head approvingly. This perfectly illustrates your maturity as inhabitants of the big cosmos. An excellent source of pride. Interlude. After briefly exchanging a glance with Garibaldi and watching Baal leave, Sinclair waved his hand at the guards, and they moved further down the corridor in the direction where the energy surge had been detected. Commander, the communicator on Sinclair's hand beeped. Yes, Doctor. I'm listening, the man replied, continuing to run down the corridor after the guards. I hope you have something worthwhile. We connected to a memory block in one of the artifacts. Be brief, if possible. We don't have much time. Ikera, the planet where they were found, had survived 6 invasions in its history, each more terrible than the previous one. They needed the perfect weapon for any occasion, an organic weapon, a weapon endowed with consciousness. It would have taken years to create artificial intelligence, which they did not have. So they copied the brain matrix of one of the designers. His name was Tuller. Sinclair raised the volume of the communicator so that all pursuers could hear him. But any intelligent being can be deceived. Therefore, so that the biomechanism does not react to the enemy's attempts at disinformation, it is programmed to obey no one except pure-blooded Icarians. But here's the problem. How to define pure-bloodedness? Damn, Garibaldi cursed, the first to understand what the doctor was getting at. How do you know what a pure Icarian is? Or a pure Earthling? No one is perfect. And how did they determine the parameters of purebredness? The program was based on ideological criteria, not a scientific approach. 11 such machines went against the next invaders. They stopped the invasion in a matter of hours. But having destroyed all the enemies, the machines turned against their creators. They look for the slightest discrepancy with the ideal parameters. As a result, the war continued until the last Icarian died. What happened to these cars later? Centuries passed and the machines crumbled to dust. Everything except the one that Vance's expedition found? Yes, Commander, everyone except number 12, who is here, protecting the world, dead for a millennium. You said that they were given the individuality of their creator? Tulara, yes. Does he perceive speech? Arguments? I suppose so, yes. There is a complete copy of consciousness, but it is subject to a program. Commander, look. The guard running ahead stopped, calling out to Sinclair. Thank you, Doctor. We need to figure out how to bypass the program logic and get to the machine's consciousness. Be at your place. Your services may be needed soon. Fine. What is it? Having finished the conversation, Sinclair approached the man who had called out to him. He was obviously here. What the... Garibaldi looked very surprised and looked back at Sinclair. In the part of the corridor that had been converted into a storage room, traces of energy impact were clearly visible on the wall. Some of the metal had turned black and even melted slightly. But that was not what was surprising. In the center of the spot, an area of the wall in the shape of a human silhouette was clearly visible, completely unaffected by the shot. Another death? No, Commander. No ashes, no pieces of clothing. There should have been at least something left. But its power grows every time. Not to that extent. Garibaldi shook his head. Even if the person had completely evaporated, there would have been at least some traces left. Right here. Sinclair looked carefully at the wall and the floor beneath it, but he too found no traces of what should have been left of the creature that had died here. It seemed that... You don't mean to say that someone here got shot by an Icarian cyborg, but waved it off and just went about their business? A shot that he had previously used to melt through a bulkhead in 10 seconds? I don't want to, but you said it yourself. It was clear from the eyes of those around that none of them could imagine the described situation, but in addition, they did not see any other explanations. And everyone had a vague thought that an ambassador from the Goa'uld Empire had just left from somewhere here. Chapter 6. God unto himself. Despite the spectacularity, you shouldn't laugh maniacally so as not to miss any important moment, which will be easily noticed by a more attentive and calm person. Dark Lord rule, Sherba 20. Sadly, being an ambassador turned out to be as dull as I had imagined. Perhaps things were different for other races, but in my case, given the replicators' capabilities in terms of information exchange and, management functions, I, a human, was bored. In the canon series, each episode described some event. Whether it was important or not is not important, but there was definitely action. Reality turned out to be much slower. The Icarian cyborg story that rocked the station lasted only a few days after the memorable meeting with Sinclair, Garibaldi, and the team of brave security guards in that corridor. The aggressive battery was quickly caught up with. And then, which made me want to make the eternal hand-face gesture, Sinclair drove the unfortunate bioweapon to suicide, telling it how the story of its creators ended, and who was to blame for it. And 2 days later, when the technicians fixed the minor damage to the energy highways caused by the cyborg's appetites, this story was simply forgotten. So the only profit I got from this whole situation was a charge of vivacity from the cyborg. True, it was very sad that the energy received could not be transferred to other replicators, alas. But information was transferred between us through the subspace connection. But not energy. I could certainly transfer these reserves to the younger ones through personal contact, but that would be irrational and stupid. Anyway, Lord Baal, good evening. I apologize for disturbing you. My name is Virkoto. I am the attaché of Ambassador Mollery. I was brought out of my aimless thoughts, which helped to at least a little subjectively shorten the periods of boredom by a signal from the terminal. Good evening, I answered with my usual smile. You haven't disturbed me at all. I'm glad it is. Wurr smiled slightly tensely. Either I'm that scary, or Mollery just keeps his subordinate on the edge. Ambassador Mollery asked me to give you an invitation. I'm not sure if you know, but this week on Babylon 5, in order to unite the different peoples, there is a mutual demonstration of religious traditions. So, Londo instructed me to send out invitations to everyone for the celebration. Of course I'll come. Convey my gratitude to the ambassador for the invitation. Certainly. And yes, Ver hesitated. If it is not an insult to your traditions, the ambassador asked that all guests attend the celebration barefoot. Barefoot? And Londo is a joker, I'll see. Don't worry, I smiled broadly. It won't be a problem. Thank you for your understanding, Lord Baal. Then, allow me to take my leave. I still have a few invitations to deliver. With a clearly relieved look, we're disconnected. If I've got the right impression of Mollery after all, something tells me that these Centauri religious rites of his will be little different from another drinking bout. However, you always have to leave others a chance to be surprised. Welcome. Please join the guests. I must give credit where credit is due. This time Londo simply exceeded all my expectations. The hall reserved for religious events of the Centauri was simply unrecognizable from the decorations and jewelry and draperies that would have made anyone's eyes tingle. And the servants? For a moment I began to think that I had mistaken the room. And this was not a religious holiday, but an elite brothel. So piquantly and at the same time exquisitely were the Centauri girls serving the guests dressed. They maneuvered among the guests carrying drinks and delicacies. Some waved small censers, spreading around the fragrant smoke of some incense. At different ends of the hall, musicians were visible with something resembling a cross between a violin and a guitar, creating an unobtrusive melody. Oh, Lord Baal, what a joy that you accepted my invitation. Londo, already quite tipsy, came out to meet me, holding a pair of golden cups in his hands. Please sit down in any place convenient for you and enjoy. Thank you, Ambassador. I bow slightly, smiling broadly, and head towards the tables laden with food, around which the guests are seated in comfortable chairs. Considering the representatives of almost all species living on the station, Londo did not waste time on trifles, simply inviting all the ambassadors and officers. Have a nice evening, gentlemen, and of course, ladies. With a pleasant smile, I bow in turn to Delenn, Sinclair, Ivanova, and Garibaldi, noticed at the table closest to me. Oh, Ambassador! Londo caught up with me and, almost spilling his wine, waved his hand hospitably towards the table. Join our company. There is enough drink and food for everyone here. I nodded and walked over to one of the empty seats, noticing along the way that the Minbari, unlike the other guests, obviously felt uncomfortable there. That's understandable. After all, I seriously doubt that Londo, no matter how hospitable a host he tried to seem, remembered the peculiarities of Minbari physiology, if he even knew about it. So it would be unlikely that there would be anything non-alcoholic on the table. And in general, being in the company of drunken guests would be unpleasant for no one. Will you allow me, Madam Ambassador? Eh? Yes, of course, Lord Baal. Sit down. I'll be glad to have your company. Delenn, Mollery's loud cry, who'd already managed to settle down a few places away from us, made her shudder. Isn't it amazing, this holiday? Yes, it is quite exquisite. In response, the Centaurian burst into joyful laughter, slamming his goblet on the table, splashing his neighbors and Ivanova, who was sitting opposite with wine. It's a celebration of life. Ver, also quite tipsy, joined the conversation, wanting to clarify what was happening. It was born in that period of our world's history when two races fought for supremacy. Our people and the race we call... Disgust was reflected on the ambassador's assistant's face. Zon. At the end of each year, we counted how many of our people survived and celebrated our luck. What happened to the zones? Garibaldi asked. They died. Every single one of them. And very good. Good. Ambassador Mollery had clearly started drinking long before the event. It was evident from his merriment. Do you know what the last Zon said before he died? The ambassador asked conspiratorially, looking around the table. Lord Baal. What do you think? I have no idea, Ambassador. Although, in fact, I fully assume that this is another joke from the ambassador. He said, "Ah!" Londo laughed and grabbed his chest, causing the Centauri guests and Ver to laugh as well. Commander. I caught out of the corner of my ear how Garibaldi leaned towards Sinclair with a question that made me smile involuntarily. Can I kill him? In such a crowd, no one will notice. I'll help you, Sinclair answered gloomily. It seemed that the drunken stupor of the Centauri ambassador had tired not only the quiet and balanced Delenn. Valtu u. Londo suddenly stood up, raised his goblet and howled at the whole hall, interrupting even the hubbub of the guests and the musical accompaniment. From different ends of the hall, other Centauri echoed him, also raising their goblets and howling like drunken wolves. Judging by the faces of Sinclair and Delenn, their opinions converged on one thing. They very much doubted the spiritual health of the ambassador, as well as all the other guests. From Centauri. Lord Baal, may I ask a question? Ivanova turned to me, looking in my direction for a long time. Of course, Madame Lieutenant, I answered with a smile. I will be happy to dispel your curiosity if it is within my power. Your name? Baal. It is mentioned in the Jewish religion. Ahem. It is one of the peoples of my home planet. I understand that this may be a simple coincidence, but do you still remember? I didn't expect. I feigned mild surprise for a few seconds and then, noticing the expression of incomprehension on Ivanova's face, I continued, just as she raised the cup to her lips, trying to hide her tension. True, even back then your people distorted my name in a very funny way. Damn. And I thought only in anime you could choke on something from surprise and spit the drink several meters ahead. See, cuff. What? The woman cleared her throat. Well, all these Bell, Baloo, Vale. I take a sip of wine, watching one of the Centaurians with interest, point blank, not noticing the lieutenant's lengthening face. By the way, Commander, I turned to Sinclair. Can you tell me, if I need to leave for some time, how much advance notice should I give so as not to cause inconvenience to the station? If you need our transition zone, then preferably at the end of the week. We are drawing up a weekly schedule, the commander answered after thinking for a moment. Thank you. I nod to the officer with a smile. Listen, Commander. Relax already. You're at a party. Having gulped down the contents of the cup, Londo turned to Sinclair and threw some fruit in his direction. He missed, of course. Yes, the man answered sarcastically. I just can't express in words how much I like it. Lieutenant, what about you? The ambassador switched to Ivanova. Have fun. You can afford to take a day off from your duties. Your tension is making my jaw ache. Look here instead. Mollery put his arm around the woman's shoulders, pointing with his free hand at one of the golden statues standing on the table. And you, Lord Baal. You'll probably be interested in learning more about your new neighbors. Meeting the gaze of a clearly tense Delenn, clearly worried about the station face that I might have when communicating with such an ambassador, I shrugged slightly, as if to say, worse has happened. Of course, Ambassador, I'm also interested in what these statues are. These are our gods of the hearth. Londo smiled happily. You must admit, in a world where you fight for your life every day, you need all the gods there are. Here. Getting more and more heated, the Centauri ambassador even climbed onto the table, knocking over glasses and bottles. This is Venzen, the god of food. This is Li, the goddess of passion. A drunken Centauri imprinted a luscious kiss on the gilded bottom of a statue depicting, A woman with tentacles. Morgoth, god of the dungeons and protector of the doors of the house. Gods wholesale and retail, gods for all occasions. Ha. Pushing plates in all directions, Londo crawled to Delen's chair and, drunkenly breathing in the direction of the wincing Minbari, settled down on the table as if it were a sofa. Delen, I never told you. Hick. That you are very beautiful for a Minbari. Yes. Raising his head, he turned his attention to Garibaldi. And you too are beautiful with some unobtrusive beauty. Everyone is beautiful. Everyone. Even me. Raising his hand, the ambassador exclaimed, But in purple I am simply magnificent. Having pompously exclaimed the last phrase, Londo fell face down into the salad, miraculously not running into anything sharp, and passed out. Oh. Wur jumped up joyfully, pointing at the ambassador. He connected with his inner self. He just passed out, Garibaldi noted skeptically. That too. Interlude. I've often wondered what it's like to be a telepath. A middle-aged man walked next to Talia Winters, Babylon's resident telepath. It's like living in a hotel with thin walls, Talia replied, shrugging slightly. You can try to ignore your neighbors, but the voices never stop. The important thing is not to eavesdrop when they don't ask. Is it difficult to block out the thoughts of others? Having reached the elevator, the couple stopped, waiting for the cabin to arrive. It depends on what kind of... Sector 14. Entering the elevator. Talia named the required floor, and casting a quick glance at Garibaldi, who was already standing there, turned her attention back to her. Interlocutor. Everyday and simple thoughts are easy, but strong emotions, whether you like it or not, will always make themselves known. Her interlocutor did not notice the sensitive jab she gave the head of security, who at that very moment was shamelessly examining her figure. Nodding understandingly, the man let the woman go ahead of him, letting her out of the elevator, which had stopped at the right floor. Good afternoon, Mr. Garibaldi. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? The telepath, who had already left the corridor, involuntarily stopped, turning around at the unfamiliar voice. Out of the corner of her eye, she only managed to notice how a tall man, dressed in obviously rich black clothes, entered the elevator and greeted the head of security, who was holding his ribs with his hand. But she could have sworn that there was no one else in the elevator except Garibaldi. Not the slightest glimmer of thought came from the stranger, as if he didn't exist at all. Commander, you have visitors. Big shots. Sinclair tiredly raised his head from the table, looking towards the security officer who entered. Let them come in. Surprised that one of the security guards, usually on duty at the station or customs, was notifying him about visitors, the man nevertheless nodded, bending over his desk again. A few seconds later, two men and a woman smoothly entered the office, dressed in a black uniform and leather gloves. On the lapels of the jackets were visible identical metal badges in the shape of a triangle with cut-off tops with the embossed letter Pisai. Stopping a couple of steps from the entrance, the man looked intently at the commander, who was still studying something on the table. No, it's quite convenient now. Sinclair suddenly answered the unspoken question, only then raising his eyes to those who had entered, and his expression changing abruptly. Having clearly recognized the visitors, he, obviously trying to regain his mental balance, closed his eyes for a few seconds, straightening up. Let's go. Away. From my head, the commander said through gritted teeth, barely opening his lips. If you want to talk, talk. I beg your pardon. The man who entered answered with a slight smile, raising his hands in front of him. I was trying to save time. This won't do. I don't like it when someone is in charge of my head, and I thought the rules forbade you from scanning people without permission. There is an exception to every rule. The woman joined the conversation. Sometimes telepaths abuse their abilities. In this case, SI supervision comes into play. We have a special responsibility, Commander. and therefore we have more rights. For the sake of efficiency, I have no doubt, Mr. Bester, my assistant, Miss Kelsey, we're looking for a rogue telepath. Our information indicates he's here on Babylon. First, we'll hold a meeting with your staff telepath, the head of security and senior officers. Kelsey continued her speech, ignoring the commander's gloomy look. And then I'm not going to set the entire station on its ear because of some psychopath. Sinclair interrupted her harshly. He's not just a psychopath, Commander. Bester, clearly the older of the two, was the picture of calm, completely ignoring the negativity directed at him from his interlocutor. He's a very dangerous individual. As long as he's at large, the safety of the entire Earth Commonwealth is at risk. You called, Commander? Entering the office upon seeing Bester and his companion, Ivanova stopped abruptly, as if she had run into a wall. It seemed that the Psi Corps, and especially its supervisory body, were familiar to Susan, and this acquaintance was by no means the most pleasant. And what? Come in, Lieutenant. Sinclair stood up from his chair and interrupted the woman's unasked question with a gesture. Excuse me, I was at business negotiations. Miss Winters walked quickly into the office, nodding hello to the telepaths and station officers. So, since Miss Winters has finally graced us with her presence, I think we can discuss the situation in more detail, Bester said calmly, gesturing to the woman who had entered, to take a chair in front of the commander's desk. He and his companion simply ignored Ivanova, who had entered. The fugitive's name is Jason Ironheart. I suppose you know him. Yes, Talia responded with slight surprise. He was my mentor at the academy. He worked with telepaths from the 5th to the 10th category. Advanced training, various subtleties. Miss Kelsey, repeating Bester's manner of behavior, began to pace around the office. And what about him? Having resigned himself to the inevitability of the presence of telepaths, and having quelled the first impulse of irritation, Sinclair abruptly switched to a business-like tone. 10th. All the teachers at Academy P10. And in PSI supervision? There was a clear sense of hostility in Ivanova's voice. P12. Someone has to control the others. And who controls you? This time, Sinclair also noticed the irritation and almost physically palpable hatred in the voice, turning his head in surprise towards his deputy. A year ago, Jason Ironheart was taken in by military intelligence. Bester's assistant continued, looking at the lieutenant with an expressionless gaze. He was involved in a secret project. What kind of project? The commander asked immediately. Commander, Bester shook his head with a slight smile. This is classified information. You are not supposed to know. Let's say this. After a second of silence, the telepath continued. It can damage the military power of the Earth and endanger the lives of our agents on other planets. We suspect that he came here to sell information to someone. This is nonsense, Thalia snapped. Jason is not a traitor. It's our duty to find him and return him to Earth. Bester allowed himself an unpleasant, slightly mocking smile again. Preferably alive. But if that doesn't work out, then dead will do. Did you keep in touch with him after finishing your studies? Yes, Talia answered slightly tensely. But the last letter from him came a year ago. We'll have to resort to scanning. Is this necessary? Talia shuddered slightly, taking a convulsive breath. I'm telling the truth. Maybe. Or maybe not. Look, you can't force her, Sinclair said discontentedly, looking from Bester to Kelsey and back. She must obey, Bester answered harshly. If they had seen each other, his imprint would have definitely remained in her consciousness. The procedure is unpleasant, the telepathic woman said coldly. You can leave or stay. We don't care. Bester gave Talia his hand, and she stood up from her chair, turning pale, and walked into the middle of the room. Sinclair exchanged uncertain glances with Ivanova and remained seated, watching as the two Psi policemen began to slowly circle the pale woman, boring into her with their intent. Gazes. Talia grew paler with each passing second, and at some point she screamed, closing her eyes and clutching her temples with her hands, staggering and almost falling. "Enough," Sinclair said quietly, but noticeably displeased. I said, "Enough." The commander stood up abruptly, burning Bester with an irritated and angry look. As if reluctantly, after a few seconds the Psychops simultaneously closed their eyes, releasing Talia. The woman staggered, only miraculously managing to lean on a chair, accepting a glass of water from Ivanova with a still lost expression on her face. She told the truth. They weren't dating. Bester summed up. Which is surprising considering your past relationship. Sooner or later, Ironheart will show up. Notify us immediately when that happens. Avoid any contact with him, especially you, Miss Winters. Do not approach him. Do not speak to him. Do you understand? Kelsey literally hissed the last words, approaching point blank to Talia. Yes, the woman exhaled. You can go. Bester waved his hand, watching Talia leave. What is Jason's danger? You don't need to know that. The telepath shook his head, looking at Ivanova. Catch him and we'll do the rest. Lord Baal. Garibaldi's voice was surprised. What are you doing in a place like this? Oh, Mr. Garibaldi. I turned to the man with a welcoming smile, distracted from another game of the local equivalent of poker. What a pleasant meeting. As you can see, I am having fun here, getting involved, so to speak, in the gambling of other races. Quite an exciting pastime, I must say, besides. I bowed to the visitors sitting at the same table with me, noticeably tense after the appearance of the head of security. I am definitely lucky today. Ahem. It's none of my business, of course, but you haven't chosen the most trustworthy place. It's very easy to get into trouble here, Ambassador. The next moment, the floor beneath our feet shook noticeably, as if Babylon 5 was one big tin barrel, and someone had just given that barrel a hearty kick. The amplitude of the vibrations grew, glasses of drinks fell on some tables, and the usual panic began to arise around us. What the hell? Garibaldi to the command post. Ivanova. What's going on? I don't know. The whole station is shaking. Damn. The next moment everything stopped as if it had never happened. I'll be right there. Turning off the communicator, Garibaldi turned to me again, looking around tensely, putting his hand on the blaster just in case. But it seemed that the sudden shaking had made a strong impression on the local public, and the expected riots never started. Everyone was more interested in getting out of the danger zone, although if the entire station was shaking, that would be problematic. Lord Baal, please, you had better return to your quarters. I'll take you to the elevator. To avoid misunderstandings. Ahem. If you insist, Mr. Garibaldi, then I will, of course, follow your advice. Just one moment, I'll just take my winnings. Bowing to my opponents in the game and taking the money I won, I carefully review the recordings from the Babylon surveillance cameras. Nothing. None of the security cameras recorded anything suspicious at the time of the shaking, except for the fact that the entire station shook at once. However, it is not surprising in the end, since surveillance was conducted only in the corridors, and the residential cabins, logically, were not covered. And frankly speaking, not all of the public areas were monitored. Okay? Let the local security guards deal with it. They dealt with the Ikaranen, so they can handle this too. Although I would like to see what could so evenly shake an 8-kilometer steel barrel hanging in space. Mr. Garibaldi, I'm ready to go. I returned to the man with a smile, carrying a small bag of gold coins in my hand. In this establishment, settlements were mainly made in this currency. However, I suppose, considering the local public, electronic currency turnover was clearly not in high esteem. The head of security sighed with relief, slightly relaxing his hand on the blaster, but still continued to carefully glance at the remaining customers in the establishment. Letting me go ahead, he moved towards the elevator, finally relaxing only in its cabin. Lord Baal, you may not know, But this sector is considered, frankly speaking, a slum, Garibaldi began uncertainly. And the people who live here are correspondingly. I know, Mr. Garibaldi. I raised my hands in front of me with a smile. But nothing allows you to get to know society better than its ordinary representatives. You must admit, it's not like Ambassador Mollery is a typical representative of the Centaurians. Cuff. Well, that's exactly what they're all like. The chief of security grumbled. Besides, I am quite capable of standing up for myself. Still, I ask you to be a little more careful in your walks around Babylon. I have enough problems with Lundo alone, especially if you remember the latest scandal with Rajesh III, he answered gloomily. No problem, I smile. I'll try to refrain from particularly risky walks. And thanks for that. The elevator stopped, taking us to the level of the transport highway. Damn. The last thing we need here is them. Two figures in identical black suits were moving towards us along the corridor. When they saw Garibaldi, they moved towards us, and a mixture of disgust and irritation appeared on the face of the head of security. Mr. Garibaldi, the man drawled, approaching us. Mr. Bester? It seems our security chief doesn't like these guys very much. Did you just feel the station shake, Mr. Garibaldi? Yes, I was just heading to the control center to find out the details. The man grimaced. Until you started detaining me. Bester's gaze shifted from Garibaldi to me, and a moment later his face frowned, reflecting a mixture of surprise and incomprehension. And the next moment Garibaldi stepped between me and the speaker, even more displeased, raising his hand in warning. Bester, it's the ambassador, and I don't think your investigation is a sufficient reason for unauthorized mind reading and starting an international conflict. Oh, what? So these two are telepaths? Exactly. Black uniforms, gloves, badges with the Latin Psi, and faces asking for a brick. Psi Corps. Human telepathic policemen who also work as errand boys for the government. Interesting. But then it becomes clear why Bester looks so surprised. It seems he tried to read my mind, but he failed. Or he just couldn't understand anything. Now is not the time to argue. We must find and capture Ironheart. Shaking his head, Bester glanced at me again. It was a mind quake, which means he is losing control of himself. This is our chance. Lord Baal. Garibaldi turned in my direction. Please forgive me, but I have to leave you. I need to be at the command post, as do Mr. Bester and his companion. Oh, it's okay, Mr. Garibaldi. I won't get lost. Don't worry. Have a nice day and good, hunting. Good day, Ambassador. Garibaldi bowed briefly and looked gloomily at the telepaths and pointed towards the corridor. Mr. Bester, this way. The Psi policeman exchanged glances with his assistant, looking at me suspiciously once more. It was clear from the tension on his face that the telepath was trying hard to read at least something in my head. Rubbing his temple in annoyance, he winced as if he had eaten an unripe grapefruit. But then he still headed after the chief of security, and the next moment the station shook again. Ivanova! Same thing. We're trying to track the epicenter of the oscillations. We're coming to you. Having cut the connection, the man ran down the corridor towards another elevator. The telepaths followed him. Now this is interesting. After the fourth thoughtquake, as Bester called it, the station workers who were observing the situation were finally able to determine the point from which the vibrations were emanating. However, even if they had not succeeded, only a blind idiot would not have guessed that a spherical force field ran through all the levels of the residential sector from the 13th to the 19th, not allowing anything material to pass through its boundaries. Naturally, this immediately aroused the burning interest of the onlookers who had crowded into the corridors at the edges of the closed zone. Coming very close, I carefully touched the field with my palm, which was enveloped in a corona of discharges. Surprisingly, the entire knowledge base of the replicators did not help me understand the principle by which the interference in front of me was constructed, I only knew that the field exists. It does not let physical objects through and is related to phenomena of an energetic nature. But no more than that. I could neither pass through it nor absorb the energy. The nanites of my body clearly felt that there was food here, but the usual methods of absorption did not lead to anything. "Hey, you better be careful with that," one of the workers in the crowd called out to me. "George tried it and now he's suffering from a burn." "It's okay," I replied, looking thoughtfully at the speaker. "I'll somehow cope with this." Another mental tremor interrupted my remark, and many in the crowd of onlookers lost their footing. Each time the tremors became stronger, they could not yet pose a threat to the station, but they were quite capable of deforming the hull to some extent. Besides, something told me that these tremors were not the worst thing that awaited us. I wonder if this field is so insurmountable. A pillar of light appeared around me, causing exclamations of surprise from the unwitting spectators. And the next moment the Asgard teleporter transferred me to the other side of the force curtain. Having looked around and made sure that I had indeed passed the field, I could not resist a little mischief by winking at the very worker who had warned me, and was now standings. With his mouth open in surprise, I slowly headed deeper into the closed zone. Interlude. A year ago, I volunteered to take part in an experiment. They were trying to sharply increase telepathic abilities, to turn P5 into P10 and P10 into God knows what. Jason, but why? Thalia stood there frowning as she listened to her friend's confession. Successful reconnaissance is the key to victory. The military always needs to know the enemy's plans, Thalia. The enemy is trying to prevent psycho-probing. We are learning to break through the blockage. We were told that this is important for the safety of the Earth. The experiment lasted for many months. Targeted mutations, the most powerful neural stimulants, genetic selection, 5, 10, sometimes up to 15 injections a day. Oh God! The woman looked incredulously at the fugitive, who was nervously pacing around the room. But one day, Ironheart stood in front of the woman. I woke up and saw everything. As if all my life I'd been a bud and now the flower suddenly blossomed. I could effortlessly break through any block. I only had to look inside. And then I learned the truth. Remember the final exams, Thalia? Of course. The telepath answered with a nostalgic smile. They checked everyone for telekinetic abilities. I remember. I chose a coin then and spent hours trying to move it even a millimeter with the power of thought. Only 1 in 1,000 people has the ability to telepathy, and only 1 in 10,000 telepaths can develop telekinesis. And even then, they went crazy very quickly. Ironheart's gaze showed pain. The true purpose of the experiment, Thalia, was yes, to instill and strengthen telekinetic abilities. And they succeeded. No one expected such success, and that's why I can't go back, even under threat of death. The man fell silent, lowering his hands and looking at the floor in front of him, and only when Thalia touched his shoulder with her hand, he perked up and sighing continued, "I thought it was needed for something important. Construction in space. It can also be used to protect diplomats or government officials from assassination attempts. But macro objects were of no use to anyone. No. I was offered to manipulate small objects. But why? Where is the logic here? Just think about it." The black man interrupted her, raising his finger. "Imagine. Let's say they need to kill someone unnoticed. They call in a master telekinetic. He, with an effort of thought, quietly squeezes the carotid artery of the person needed. Blood circulation stops. The brain suffocates without oxygen. The victim dies. All that's left is to release the artery. A perfect murder. No poison, no wounds, no fingerprints. But they didn't understand, Thalia. They let the genie out of the bottle. A genie with whom... Oh. Ironheart groaned and grabbed his head, and the space around him shook again, causing the now familiar tremors in the bulkheads and the entire hull of the Babylon. "Jason, Thalia cried out in fear. What is this? Go away. Hurry. Please. I can't hold you back. I apologize for interfering, but I believe I can help. Thalia involuntarily recoiled, and a tall man with a neat beard in leather clothes entered the cabin, completely ignoring the shaking and the rampage of the elements around. The same one whom Thalia saw entering the elevator, the same one who looked like absolute emptiness before her telepathic gaze. Who are you? Ironheart, still clutching his head, stared at the man who had entered. For a few seconds he clearly tried to read his thoughts, but like Thalia, it seemed he saw absolutely nothing there. I suppose? Baal tilted his head to the side with interest. You are also unable to read me? After all, you are a telepath? Jason Ironheart stepped back, grimacing painfully, taking on a slightly pitiful look. I won't go back. Whoever they send for me, I won't go back to Earth. The man waved his arms, pushing the air away from himself with his palms. It was as if a weak breeze blew through the cabin, and the interior items that were between him and Baal began to crumble with a quiet rustle into silvery, quickly disappearing. Dust. A chair crumbled, then a table with a communication terminal, a corner of the bed, which was also caught. And the next moment the wave reached the Goa'uld ambassador. What? Thalia, who had been watching her friend's new abilities with fear, screamed, expecting the stranger who had somehow found them to also crumble into dust. But nothing happened. The figure of the man in the cloak rippled, as if losing density for a moment, and the next second he was still standing in front of them, shaking his head and turning with interest to the door that had fallen apart behind him. Mr. Ironheart, I have not come as an enemy. He smiled and held his unarmed hands out in front of him. I understand that you are having a hard time controlling your abilities right now. Let me help you with that. You don't want the whole of Babylon to fall apart like the furniture. Baal raised an eyebrow and nodded at the remains of the bed. Do you? It would be sad to me to be the cause of the death of so many sentient beings, even though some of them deserved it. How? Why did you survive? It seemed that the attack had passed, and now Ironheart could relax for a while. He clenched his hands into fists nervously, still looking warily towards the ambassador. Let's put it this way. Baal smiled slyly, stroking his beard with his fingers. It's hard to harm me. The next moment he became serious and continued without a smile. So will you allow me to give you a little help? For 10 seconds, which seemed like an eternity to Thalia, Ironheart thought, and then, throwing a worried glance in the direction of the telepath, he nevertheless nodded, lowering his hands. Yes. Okay. The man nodded briefly, stepped forward, and then did something that made Thalia scream again. Truly scared, he briefly, without any swing, thrust his hand into Ironheart's forehead. Almost before our eyes, the trembling that was still shaking the station slightly began to subside, and the telepath, who'd been standing tense even after the main peak of the attack had subsided, gritting his teeth, visibly relaxed, going limp a little. His face began to regain its natural color, erasing the strong nervous fatigue and unnatural pallor. In the end, the oscillations died down completely, and the man, as soon as Baal pulled his hand out of his head, breathed a sigh of relief, staggering slightly and leaning on the miraculously intact bedside table. The Psi Corps strives for one thing, to establish control. Control over telepaths, over economics and law, over thought and matter. Ironheart began quietly coming to his senses, but there is something much more powerful, something they did not even suspect until I crossed this line. Thought controlling matter and energy. I have mastered the influence on the smallest objects, down to the atomic level. Looking at those around me, I do not see people, but an entire galaxy of subatomic particles that I can scatter and put together again. It is frightening. Amazing. I take my hat off to your scientists. Figuratively speaking, of course. Baal bowed, imagining a wave of his hat, at your level of technological development, to artificially stimulate the evolution of an individual on such a scale. Lord Baal. Yes, yes, the man waved his hand. I may not approve of the methods, but the very fact of such an achievement still commands respect. But you are right, humanity is not yet ready for such a level of possibilities. If the Corps catches Jason, Thalia excitedly joined the conversation, they'll cut him into pieces just to repeat the effect. Can you imagine what this threatens? What weapons they will receive? That is exactly why I had to run. I believe you. So, Mr. Ironheart, I assume you require a ship to leave the station? And time? Yes. Jason sat, lightly rubbing his forehead, still not believing that just a few minutes ago someone else's hand was in this very place. But even more amazing was the fact that now he did not have to make any effort to restrain his growing powers. I feel like you did something to me now. It's so easy to control myself. But this is not a solution to your problem. I have merely taken upon myself the main burden created by the growth of abilities on your brain. But this will not stop the process of evolution itself. Yes, that's why I need to leave Babylon before the changes reach the finish line. I don't want to be the cause of so many victims. Baal seemed to think for a moment, but then nodded to his thoughts and smiled. It won't be as difficult to do as you think. Sorry to bother you, Commander Sinclair, came a voice from the man's communicator, which he simply didn't expect to hear over the station's intercom. But I have a little conversation that you might find extremely interesting. I hope your friends in stylish suits with fashionable badges are not with you right now. Lord Baal? Sinclair squeezed out, dumbfounded. No, they're with Garibaldi now. They've gone. Damn it! How did you get on this frequency? All the better. Baal simply ignored the question. Would you mind if I borrowed one of your transport shuttles? If so, I might be able to resolve the small crisis that your guests were sent to resolve. Do you know where Ironheart is? He's dangerous. Lord Baal. You have no idea how serious the situation really is. So what about the ship, Commander? I guarantee that Babylon will not suffer from this at all. Okay. Sinclair glanced at the monitor with the flight schedule. There's a shuttle in the third dock, the ambassador interrupted the man. Undergoing scheduled maintenance. It will suit me just fine. I'll give him permission to take off. Thank you, Commander. You won't regret it, and yes, please take a step to the right. What? The commander did what they wanted from him out of surprise, moving to the right and freeing up space near the console. The next moment, a bright beam illuminated the control center, forcing everyone to close their eyes. When the glow went out, a dumbfounded and confused Talia Winters stood next to the commander. Damn it. How? But the commander's communicator beeped, disconnecting the connection. It looks like this will be a long conversation with the Goa'uld ambassador, if, of course, he will be even a little more frank than Kosh. Commander, there is an unscheduled flight in the third dock. Let him through. The man sighed tiredly, approaching the observation window. Miss Winters, I believe your friend Ironheart will successfully escape Bester after all. Are you all right? Yes. I'm completely fine, although I don't understand at all how I ended up here and what's going on. You're not the only one. A shuttle appeared in the observation window, just leaving the Babylon airlock. Having moved away from the station for some distance, the shuttle stopped, not even thinking of heading to the transition zone. Commander, I'm detecting an energy surge in the ship. Strong? Sinclair glanced nervously at the dispatcher. The instruments are going off the charts. A bright flash forced the observers to shield their eyes with their hands, but even so, the light was blinding. Blinking a few seconds later, Sinclair watched in shock as the ship simply dissolved into the void of space, and in its place a glowing human figure of enormous size formed, surrounded by radiating waves of energy. Thalia, rang out in the heads of everyone present. Jason, the formation is complete. In memory of what connected us, accept my gift. This is the only thing I can do to help you now. The figure extended its hand towards Babylon, and a tiny spark of light separated from it, covering this distance in a few seconds and flowing into the woman's forehead. Sighing quietly, Talia began to slowly sink to the floor, losing consciousness. Sinclair barely managed to catch her and prevent her from falling. Goodbye, Commander. Thank you all for your help, and convey my gratitude to Lord Baal. His mind is still inaccessible to me. Goodbye. We will meet again in 1,000,000 years. Jason waved goodbye, and his figure shrank into a cluster of bright lights that in the blink of an eye, without any effects, took off from the station, lost among the stars. Having finished my altruistic helping spell and transferred Ironheart to the ship and Talia to the bridge, I, mentally allocating more computing power from the general cluster of replicators for analysis, with an independent look went to the greenhouse of Babylon 5. The ambassador strolling there did not cause much surprise. Fortunately, many did so, and I had time to study the information received. Alas, by and large, the hopes placed on him were not justified. A small number of nanites introduced into Jason's body, and in addition to helping control his capabilities, closely monitoring all the processes occurring in his body, stopped transmitting information immediately as he completed his transformation and moved to another level of existence. That is, with a partial ascension after all. My mind did not disappear from them. I flew. Of course, I was able to find out the order of processes occurring in the human brain. I made a genetic map, an algorithm of changes. I even managed, so to speak, to look from the inside at the work of that very telepathy, but I was able to understand very little. In essence, purely on the physical level, there was an avalanche-like increase in the speed and intensity of information exchange between neurons, which ultimately moved to a level where impulses no longer needed a material carrier to exist. The technical side of the issue was generally clear to me, the replicator, and quite feasible. At least, the subspace connection between individual modules and the younger ones as a whole worked in a similar way. But the reason and method for the transition of consciousness to a purely energy form is a completely different matter. Considering that I did not so much see the work of psionic powers myself, although I directly participated in controlling them, as I caught glimpses of actions in Ironheart's consciousness. Something told me that there was no hint of a simple physical explanation here. Besides, it was not a fact that the necessary processes were in principle accessible for reproduction and analysis by technical means. Research, statistics, observations, and experiments on other telepaths were required. It would also be good to obtain Ironheart's genetic material before the mutations began. In any case, since Jason's ascension was initiated artificially, even the data obtained could not be considered reliable and suitable for repetition. Well then, the lost nanites can be written off as unforeseen losses, although they gave me good material. There will be food for thought. Lord Baal. I was brought out of my thoughts by Sinclair's voice, who seemed to have been specifically looking for me in the garden. Would you mind giving me some time for a conversation? Commander Sinclair, I smiled, turning to the man. With pleasure, but only on the condition that you join me on a walk through this wonderful garden. Having waited for the commander's affirmative nod, I smoothly moved my hand towards one of the paths and slowly head between the plants, putting my hands behind my back. Ahem. I spoke with Miss Winters, and when I finally got rid of the indignant Bester, the man sighed tiredly. She told me about your conversation with Mr. Ironheart, but she doesn't remember you contacting me at all. How then can we explain our conversation about providing a ship? What a beautiful tree, don't you think, Commander? Half turning to Sinclair, I smile and point towards the spreading apple tree. You teleported yourself. There are plenty of witnesses to this. He glanced briefly at the plant, stubbornly pressed his lips together and continued. You withstood Ironheart's blow, which pulverized the steel. Telepaths cannot see you. Moreover, you stuck your hand into Ironheart's head and did something to calm his abilities. Then you teleported him and Talia. I don't know what to think. Against the background of all this, the fact that you somehow managed to get into a closed communication channel is even lost. You're simply making one key mistake, Commander. I sigh and stop, shifting my gaze from the greenhouse to the man. You're looking at appearances. That's where the wrong conclusions come from. What do you mean by this? You consider me an ordinary visitor to this station. All the best, Commander. Smiling and making a slight bow, I headed further along the path, soon disappearing into the light haze that spread between the trees and bushes to maintain the necessary humidity. Chapter 7. We are not stokers. We are not carpenters. The headquarters must be designed in such a way that the door is visible from every workstation. And Dark Lord Rule Njara 90. The Ironheart story was a prime example of the capabilities of the local telepaths. It was comforting to know that at least the human brain breakers were unable to read my thoughts, or whatever replaced them. It was hard to say about Jason himself, but at least I had no problem withstanding his telekinesis. The impact was certainly unpleasant, but the connections between the nanites in my body were strong enough to successfully resist a brutal attempt to tear matter apart. And even if he had been able to see something in me after the ascension, it seemed he had kept his thoughts to himself. All this gave hope that I would remain an unknown quantity even to the Vorlons, if of course their telepathy worked in a similar way. In any case, so far, I have been unambiguously lucky. The number of potential threats to me has been decreasing, and I've also made Sinclair think about what I am and what I really need on the station. Whether this will be useful we will see later, but in any case, a certain degree of piety on the part of the future Minbari prophet Valen will hardly be superfluous. The analysis of the received data and sluggish thoughts on the subject of the commander were interrupted by data received from the juniors, or rather, from one of the reconnaissance ships sent to mark out the territory for raw material systems, and at the same time to compare how much the map of this galaxy corresponds to the one I knew from the Stargate universe. Not checking the latter would have been a trademark stupidity. Fortunately, I had information about the star maps of the Goa'uld from the flagship of Apophis, and there, among other things, planets with deposits of Naquada were marked. So, information from the younger ones came, of course, constantly, but the latest discovery caught my attention. Standing out from the others and interesting, the scout found a large planetary system in which, in addition to several gas giants, 2 asteroid belts and planets rich in minerals, life was discovered. Moreover, intelligent life. The planet was very similar to Earth, differing only in size, 15% larger, and the shape of the land according to the surveys conducted by the probe from orbit. There is only one huge continent occupying about 40% of the surface, and almost completely covered with dense forests. Among the systems studied in the past, this was the first planet of a clearly terrestrial type. According to the results of a more detailed study of the biosphere, the intelligent beings on this planet were represented by upright, lizard-like humanoids of a clearly predatory appearance, something like a man covered in scales and with a shortened alligator head. They were still far from the technological level of development. At the present time, the species was clearly experiencing a period of tribal structure, living in small villages and farms scattered throughout the forest and having an obviously aggressive behavior. Suffice it to say that in 2 hours of observation, the ship's probe identified a dozen small tribes living close to each other, between whose representatives multiple skirmishes were observed over prey or hunting grounds. Having briefly observed them, I found no reason to interfere in the life of this species, although it was possible to leave an observation post in the system, especially since components of trinium were found in the asteroid belt. This alloy was many times lighter and stronger than steel, and was perfect for both ship armor and replicator blocks. so abandoning it would be stupid. So, having received the command, the scout sent some of the blocks to the richest asteroids and went into hyperspace to the next route point. Unfortunately, for the most part, this galaxy refused to match the available information from the Gate database. Somewhere at known addresses it was simply empty. Somewhere there were planets, but they were completely different from what was marked on the map. However, it would be naive to think that two completely different worlds would suddenly coincide in such details. The fact that there are ingredients for trinium here is already a great success, leaving hope that perhaps somewhere I will be able to find Naquadah. And of course, all the scouts had the priority command to mark, in case of detection, sources of neutronium. Alas, such a gift of fate as was with the Asgard's home planet, Othala, was not expected here. At least at the known coordinates there was a gas giant like Jupiter, and in the entire system there was no hint of habitable planets. But there should be quite a lot of neutron stars in the galaxy. They just need to be found, and solve the problem of raw material extraction in such unfavorable conditions. Having returned to myself, I thoughtfully leaned back in my chair, stroking my beard with my fingers. A stupid human habit. But I'd already become so accustomed to the image of Baal that such behavior somehow passed by itself. In addition to exploring star systems and searching for resource bases for the arrangement of my territory, I would really benefit from access to a powerful and effective source of energy. Yes, the younger ones were able to assemble an extremely effective generator using the technologies of the same Asgards. But if my premonitions do not deceive me, and in this galaxy there will be a shortage of the specific materials I need, they will have to be created artificially. And here, whether by replicator methods or by the synthesis teleportation of the Asgards, the process will require so much energy that it becomes scary in advance. Today turned out to be surprisingly eventful. The second reconnaissance probe reported the discovery of an inhabited system on my territory. This time it was a fairly advanced civilization, confidently using all its planets. Moreover, the big surprise was the fact that, according to the intercepted signals, the local inhabitants belonged to the same biological species as the operator of the great machine, peacefully sleeping now under Babylon 5. Vaguely. But something about these comrades was remembered. It seemed they were supposed to fly to the station and present their rights to the device on the planet. The probe, covered by an invisibility field, flew around all the inhabited planets, confirming the initial conclusion that it was a race similar to the operator of the great machine, who for some unknown reason still did not use this machine and apparently did not even know about it. The technological level was very different. Unfortunately, the main goal for which the scout flew here remained unfulfilled. According to the map, there should have been a planet here that belonged to the Goa Old Sokar and had rich deposits of Naquadah. However, according to their parameters, the planets were not even remotely similar to the one indicated in the database, and the scan did not reveal the slightest trace of the mineral I needed. Alas, but it looks like I will have to adapt the existing technologies to use Quantum 40. After a short reflection, the probe formed a small volume of replicators from the womb and several workers, which were then transferred to the planet identified as the capital of the system, with a team for covert observation and study of the technological base. The level of replicators, of course, exceeds everything I have seen in this galaxy, and by almost thousands of years of intense research. But it would be strange not to take advantage of the freebie that came into my hands, and they will serve as an instrument of influence if necessary. And the probe itself remained in the system, lost on one of the satellites, for a more complete observation of what was happening. While looking through the information coming from other scouts, I was simultaneously selecting a planet suitable for declaring the capital of my territory, and a cover for my legend, and just a base would not be superfluous. After several objects discarded for various reasons, the thought crept into my head that it would be much easier to find some bare rocky ball that no one would lay claim to, and then transform it into something more pleasing to the eye. The younger ones would easily cope with the tasks of primary terraforming, and the biosphere could be filled manually. Fortunately, there would be no problems with collecting, or even just buying, compatible life forms from around the galaxy and bringing them to one place. In any case, it was probably time to worry about the arrival of the assistant. It was a pity that neutronium had not yet been discovered, but for now it was possible to make do with first-generation nanites, which were used in the android Reese. All the data about their progenitor was stored in the memory of the replicators, and for this purpose, the found deposits of trinium components were perfect. Artificial intelligence and character for the attaché ambassador of the intergalactic empire had already been thought out in a rough draft, but the process of writing a personal matrix with complete free will, but the impossibility of betrayal was much more difficult. Therefore, it remained to allocate computing power for writing a set of programs, then manually edit them, and wait until a sufficient amount of resources were obtained in the found system to create a carrier body. According to preliminary calculations, this would take 3 weeks, 2 days, and 14 hours. But when the firmware would be ready was beyond calculation. Well, then I have plenty of time to look through the database of already discovered uninhabited planets once again and, as I planned, choose a worthy candidate for the role of the capital among them. One of the options looked interesting enough to pay closer attention to it. A 3-dimensional holographic model of a star system appeared before my eyes. Psychologically, it was still more convenient for me to imagine myself in the virtual space of my inner world. A relatively common double configuration of stars, unusually stable, 4 planets, and an extensive asteroid belt. Among other things, the system was noted as a potential resource base, but nothing prevents the production of asteroids along with the construction of the planet, since one of them, 20% larger than Mars, was on the near border of the set of orbits suitable for the emergence of life. Surprisingly, the binary star of this system belonged to the class of separated, that is, a pair of stars, the exchange of masses between which was impossible. And although one of the luminaries of the system was a white dwarf, and the second belonged to the same class as the Sun, in general, the system was still stable, and was in a stable period of its evolution, providing the planet with enough heat and light. But there was no life on it. Once upon a time, a cataclysm occurred here, most likely caused by the transition of one of the stars to the current status of a dwarf, so the planet was lifeless and practically devoid of an atmosphere. Well, that means there will be work for the younger ones to restore the atmosphere, the fertile soil layer, and then, when the ecology returns to normal, it will be possible to bring animals and plants here. Having given the appropriate commands, I begin to design my future residence. And the choice was from the architecture of the Goa'ulds, since I had chosen their form factor for my fleet, to the multitude of civilizations absorbed by the replicators. However, I also had time. In the end, the choice fell on the Goa'uld pyramidal architecture. At least it looks quite interesting from the outside, not to mention the pathos of the interior decoration. But no one is stopping you from extending the underground tiers of the buildings as far as you like into the bowels of the planet. No one? That's what I think too. Especially since I will definitely need a lot of research facilities. Ironheart's ascension, done practically on the knee by half-educated human scientists, did not give me peace. And inhuman experiments are a great way to while away your free time and brighten up the gray everyday life of an ambassador on Babylon 5. Ahem. Having made the final decision, I send a cargo of replicators and resources from the first system I chose to the chosen planet. In addition to an additional resource base for terraforming, the younger ones will be able to immediately begin building a research complex, since neither I nor they need an atmosphere and for the survival of the samples. If such a thing is needed, this atmosphere can always be created and maintained artificially until my capital comes to life fully. What do we know about the Ascended? Besides the fact that in my home universe as a replicator they were arrogant, two-faced assholes. The Alterans, or Ancients, as they were called, had long and laboriously followed the path of technological development and personal self-improvement. Were there telepaths among them? It is not known. Telekinesis was demonstrated almost without exception, and even before the Ascension, but there are no examples of reading and transmitting thoughts. Although, on the other hand, their databanks work directly with the operator's consciousness, which means that they did have the skills and methods of working with the mind. This can already be worked with. This can already be used as a starting point in research. In addition, Ironheart, before waving his glowing hand at everyone, was a telepath and telekinetic. Now, what do I know about the ancient races of this universe? Depressingly little, to be honest. All my knowledge is limited to fragmentary knowledge of a TV series I once watched, which, however, was not lying so far. The Vorlons were definitely telepaths, all of them. Remembering the last seasons, Lorien, aka the First, also dabbled in direct thought transmission, and they all look exactly like the Ascended, albeit a little strange. So in any case, I should start by studying telepaths and their characteristics. I already had information from Ironheart's genetic material, but for a more complete understanding of the whole picture, it was necessary to collect the same data from telepaths of other races. Some information, of course, should have been in the medical service databases, but it was unlikely that there was a complete DNA map of the species living on Babylon. Having made this decision, I leave my cabin, heading for another walk around the station. In the green zone of Babylon you can, again, while away the time and meet almost any alien. And along the way, the corridors will be far from empty. In general, for me, as a replicator, collecting DNA samples was quite simple. It was enough to just touch the object that the organic I was interested in touched, so that the nanites would count the trace left there. Or get someone's glass, if the target was wearing gloves, for example, by getting a saliva sample. A walk through the station's garden, as I walked towards the restaurant area, brought me my first catch. First I held a tripping Minbari. Then I passed a bowl that had rolled away. To a Drazi child, in short, I brought good to everyone I could reach. But still, this method of collecting information was considered ineffective. Accidents often don't happen, and arranging them yourself is a stupid thing to do. And it can also arouse suspicion. Finally, having reached one of the more or less respectable casinos, I nodded to the doorman and stopped near one of the tables, watching the game with interest. In my past life, I was not particularly keen on gambling, but the classic roulette, which apparently had not changed at all over the past century, was easy to recognize. Surprisingly, as far as the capabilities of the replicator allowed me to understand, the game here was fair. There was no magnet under the roulette, no chiseled ball. Everything happened exactly as it should, based on the calculations of the system's behavior. It's even strange somehow. Or are there some more sophisticated deception schemes here? Would you like to join the game? The croupier asked me politely, keeping an eye on the spinning roulette wheel. I think so. I nod. I need to exchange money for chips, I suppose. That's right, you can use your personal card. The terminals are at the entrance. Nodding once more, I returned to the entrance of the establishment, forming a pass card from the nanites in my hand on the go, which also serves as a credit card here. Of course, I could have convinced the computer that I needed to give out game currency, but there should be a video surveillance system here. Let's not unnecessarily irritate the security service. I returned to the table with a small pile of plastic roundels of various denominations, just in time for the next bets. Gentlemen, place your bets, the croupier said, waiting until I had settled myself on one of the chairs. Place your bets. There are no more bets. Well, let's check the probability theory. The first bet was made as simple as possible. 1,000 on black and 1,000 each on the number 13 in the first dozen. While the dealer was spinning the roulette and throwing the ball, I was watching his hands carefully, calculating the trajectory and the probable result of the throw. No luck this time. 9 red. In any case, as far as I saw, this casino runs its business honestly. The first impression did not deceive. The ball landed exactly where it should have landed according to the calculations after the throw. Yes, perhaps. Without interfering in the game process, even my capabilities will not give a reliable chance of winning. Only if you calculate the most probable results of the throws and bet there. But the difference there will be little. Gentlemen, place your bets. I had fun like this for about half an hour, winning and losing about equally. So there was no particular benefit in spending time like this, except for 2 accidental hand touches with my table neighbors, a human woman and a young Centaurian. Having thanked the participants for the game, I glance around the casino. There. Perhaps a poker table would be a more convenient method of collecting samples. And the game is more interesting at the new table. The collection of samples went much more cheerfully. A representative of the Vree race. The devil knows how he managed to play with normal humanoids given their language traditions. A traditional representative of the Hers, who did not miss any gambling game, and 3 humans. As far as I remember the canon, the Narns and Vorlons remain from the alien races constantly hanging around the station and demanding attention. All the others in the canon did not particularly shine. And you can't even get to the Vorlons on a lousy goat, as they say. Because I have a hard time imagining how to obtain DNA from an energy life form, especially through his spacesuit. Although the fact that the spacesuit was probably alive was already interesting. But for now, it's not worth pestering Kosh. Yes, definitely not worth it. While I was enjoying the game, the younger ones quickly began to decipher the samples they had received. And after 2 games, I began to receive the first data. It was a funny fact, but each of the DNAs had common features, absolutely identical, with an adjustment for differences in physiology, of course. Moreover, since these same elements were also present in Ironheart's DNA and, by all indications, they were responsible for telepathic activity, it could be concluded that telepathy was a genetic deviation that arose in all representatives of the species, but became dominant after the accumulation of a critical mass. It was quite interesting. The genes that were found were too pure and ordered to have appeared naturally. That is, they were clearly artificially grafted. Genetic engineering is, of course, nothing new, but not on thousands of representatives of dozens of races in this corner of the galaxy at the same time. It was definitely worth some additional thought. Unfortunately, my memory of the canon of Babylon 5 is extremely fragmentary, so it is not possible to say for sure whether my conclusions are correct. Having received access through the juniors to the complete medical databases on aliens, available to the station computer, I filter out all possible information regarding telepathy, in particular, and genetic engineering in general. What do we have there? On Earth, the first telepaths began to appear in the second half of the 21st century. No, isolated cases were encountered much earlier, but it became a mass phenomenon precisely. Then, people who were able to influence the thoughts of others simply suddenly began to be born. With other races, everything happened approximately the same, only the time frames differed. But this is not surprising, given the difference in their development. It's funny. Maybe this is wishful thinking, but if you think about it, proportionally, brain breakers appeared in everyone in this corner of the galaxy at practically the same level of development, about a century and a half before entering the big world. Again, I don't remember the canon in this part, but something strongly tells me that behind all this, the energetic ears of our secretive acquaintances are sticking out and simply sparkling. Well, or their no less secretive opponents are not so important here. Definitely, we need more samples to collect statistical data. So, we'll have to have fun and idly wander around the station further. Although, I have younger ones, and on Babylon, there is such a nice place as the slums. And since the spiders have already penetrated all the communications of Babylon 5, They are quite capable of catching among those whom no one will look for. Guinea pigs for Vivi? Study? All the same, the lab is not ready yet, and I simply cannot check the data in practice. For now, the best option would be theoretical training and accumulation of statistics. Having finished another game and said goodbye to my table mates, I get up and head back to the exchange terminals at the exit of the casino. My winnings for today were purely symbolic, but on the other hand, I don't really need it. Having exchanged the chips for money, I take my card from the terminal and, after thinking for a moment, head to the station's trading sector. I haven't been there yet. Zocalo greeted me with the usual crowd of station dwellers, evoking associations with the Brownian motion of molecules. They sold everything here, from light snacks to tickets for arriving transporters. I suppose that, if necessary and with connections, it would probably be possible to get hold of something more nuclear. Oops. Funny. Someone just tried to pickpocket me in a crowd. The nanites tracked someone's touch to the left pocket of my coat, of course, immediately reading a sample of its fabrics. Surely, a human teenage girl was very disappointed, not finding anything valuable. But the fact remains that the market is the same in any corner of the universe. Not paying any attention to what happened, I push my way, collecting samples along the way to a small cafe, represented by a bar counter and several high chairs. Having made an order, I look up with interest at the TV screen, on which something news was just playing. Nothing urgently needed. However, it is quite logical that this is a remote object. Humans and aliens already live in rather stressful conditions, if you remember that, at least once. But they probably managed to fight among themselves. It would be stupid to give information so openly and in a public place that could lead to public unrest. Having finished the ordered cocktail and paid, I leisurely head to the nearest exit into the corridor. Exactly 3 weeks, 1 day, and 21 hours later, slightly ahead of schedule, the juniors had completed the extraction of enough resources to create a second-generation humanoid replicator body. The same body that Reese had when she was discovered by the intelligent machines. Unfortunately, the creation of my attaché's personality matrix was far from complete than I would have liked. But such things are not done in a hurry, so all that was left was to wait. Moreover, during this same time, the younger ones managed to thoroughly dig in on the planet chosen for the capital, building if not a full-fledged research complex, for which there was still not enough time, but a completely decent laboratory for genetic research. In the future, the complex will only grow, going deeper into the planet. But what was available now was quite enough to begin more thorough research related to telepaths in general, and Ascension in particular. Having started the process of assembling the android, fortunately I had already thought up the assistant's appearance a long time ago. I switched my attention to the created laboratory. I still need to figure out if there is some connection between telepathic abilities and the local analog of Ascension that Ironheart went through. Over the past time, I managed to collect a good number of samples of various species, so that I could begin practical experiments, not limiting myself to theoretical research. Moreover, thanks to Asgard's knowledge and technologies of cloning and genetic engineering, growing any organism, having its DNA code, is the simplest task. In addition to the genetic laboratory, part of the complex being built by the juniors was also allocated for technological needs. The absence of Naquadah in the visible part of the galaxy forced us to worry about reorienting known costly technologies to a new element base, and this was not so simple. The study of the physical properties of Quantum 40 in itself was only the first and simplest step. What followed was much more difficult since many technologies, both those of the Goa'uld, the Asgard, and other civilizations absorbed by the replicators, were built specifically for the physical properties of Naquadah. They were based on them. Thus, I had to recalculate the entire physics of the processes literally from scratch, and not only recalculate, but also check them experimentally, since even the computing power of the replicators did not guarantee the absence of errors in the mathematical model. In general, there was nothing extraordinary in this. normal work, and progressing at a much faster pace than any organic race would have. But an immediate result was still not to be expected. Moreover, the task was not on the priority list. The collection and development of resources was much more important now. However, the priority matters were, in general, finished at this point. The juniors could conduct physical experiments independently, requiring from me only background, observation and analysis of some particularly unusual results. Resources were successfully dug up, and for the first stage of genetic experiments with the telepathic gene, time was needed to let the samples grow. No, of course. It was possible to simply synthesize organics using Asgard technology. But, objectively speaking, there was absolutely no need for haste. Let the first batch be grown naturally, and this required a decent amount of energy, and the power supply of the laboratory complex was still far from ideal. So I again faced the question of how to occupy my free time. Should I go and play chess with Sinclair? I thoughtfully scratched my beard, nodding to my thoughts, getting up from the sofa in the cabin allocated to me, and grabbing the carved chess set I recently bought in Zocalo, I walk out the door, heading to look for the commander. Interlude. Mr. Garibaldi? Ambassador? The man winced slightly but put down the newspaper that had helped him while away the long and dull shift, and looked up at Delenn, who had entered. Sorry to bother you, but I had an appointment with Commander Sinclair an hour ago. He didn't show up. Do you know where he is? Unfortunately, no. Garibaldi shook his head in surprise. Were you in the wheelhouse? Yes, but Lieutenant Ivanova said that she hadn't seen him since the evening. Garibaldi frowned and turned to the communication terminal. Commander, this is Garibaldi. Not receiving an answer, the man frowned even more and turned to the woman. Forgive me, but I will contact you later. With a brief nod, the head of security quickly left the room, heading towards the commander's cabin. Commander, are you there? The intercom on the door was as silent as the station's communications. When there was no response, Garibaldi took out his keycard and inserted it into the lock. Commander? Jeff? The living area of the cabin was empty. The sleeping area, separated by transparent doors, was empty too. And only Sinclair's communicator lay on the nightstand by the bed. Damn it. This is Garibaldi, calling the control room. Ivanova is listening. We're in trouble. Is there anything? The head of security asked from the doorway, entering the command post with Franklin. I'm tracking all the ships that have launched from the station in the last 8 hours. Ivanova shook her head. We can send several boats, fly around the station and scan its surface. What should I look for? The body, Garibaldi said gloomily. If they threw it outside, it's still there. Just in case. Mr. Garibaldi, Ivanova showed with her gaze everything she thought about such assumptions of her colleague. I am incredibly glad that, unlike you, such ideas do not come to my mind. Your name is Jeffrey David Sinclair. Rank, Commander. Age, 39. Born in a colony on Mars in 2218. Became a fighter pilot in 2240. Less than a year later, another promotion, and here you are. A squadron commander. Commander Sinclair slowly turned around at the voice coming from the impenetrable darkness behind him. There, with his feet up on the table, sat a man unfamiliar to him, nondescript in appearance, dressed in a neat civilian suit. A suit that was very often worn by agents of internal intelligence, which had entered many proverbs and sayings. A combat officer, like his father and his grandfather before him, and his great-grandfather before him, the man stood up abruptly, coming right up to the commander. You were destined for the rank of admiral. So what happened, Commander? How did you fall out of the race? Go to hell. I won't tell you anything, Sinclair answered coldly. I bet you don't have much time. The guys are already looking for me. If you're still on Babylon 5... The man raised his eyebrows ironically, wanting to sound confident in his words. but something deep inside told Jeffrey that he wasn't as confident as he wanted to sound. "If we haven't taken you somewhere." "But you're right," the man nodded. "You don't have to tell me anything. What about someone else?" "Hello, Commander." Another voice came from behind, making Sinclair jump. There was no way its owner could be here. He had been dead for a long time. "Mitchell?" The commander turned to him, only for a second betraying his excitement in his voice, but the next moment turning back and stubbornly jerking his head. "Mitchell is dead. This is all a lie. But you must admit, it is a very high-quality deception, don't you think, Commander?" Sinclair's partner's vision melted away and both men shuddered, turning towards the voice. "What? Impossible! Who are you and how did you end up here?" The suit stepped aside, and from the darkness behind him, looking around with interest, came a tall man with a neat beard, dressed in elegant leather clothes. Under his arm he carried a folding chess set. "Oh, forgive me if I disturbed you. I just wanted to play a game with the commander. Chess, I think. But he wasn't at his place, so I had to look for him. Will you allow me?" Lord Baal swept some papers off the table and quickly setting up the board and pieces on it, gestured invitingly to the second chair for Sinclair. "What are you doing here? Is this another hallucination?" Sinclair clenched his fists and turned towards his previous interlocutor. "I beg your pardon, Commander. I didn't mean to disturb you." Some surprise and guilt were reflected on Baal's face. "If you are very busy, I can come later." Only now did Sinclair notice that they were left alone in the darkness. His first interlocutor had disappeared somewhere. "But perhaps, since your interlocutor has left us," the smile returned to the ambassador's face. "We will play after all. Otherwise, they will really find you soon. Again, business, routine. And I, honestly, sometimes get bored." Sinclair's face reflected the thought that he clearly didn't understand something about this life. But after some thought, he sat down on the chair. Baal hospitably offered the man to choose the color of the figures, and he himself leaned back, stroking his beard with his fingers. "I'm in the 3rd sector, continuing the search." The pilot of another boat, scanning the station's hull with scanners, reported in a tired voice. Garibaldi tiredly walked away from the communications terminal, once again running his eyes over the security camera monitors. "Chief, we checked everything from the 1st to the 3rd sector. No traces. We need to expand the search area. Gather everyone you can." The man turned to the deputy who had entered. "We've already collected them. Even Miller and Benson." "Benson? But he is unreliable. We have temporarily suspended him." "I know, but we checked his file, and there was even more money in his account." "What? But that's impossible." Garibaldi frowned and walked over to the computer terminal, entering the security service database. "I checked the other day. It was empty." "But look, he has 5,000 credits in his account. This wasn't the case a day ago. When he paid off his debts, he still had 5,000 left. That means there were still more than 15,000. Where the hell did Benson get 15 grand? I have no idea." "Wait a minute," Garibaldi began to list. "At 3 in the morning he receives the money, and 4 hours later the commander disappears. Find Benson and bring him here." "Yes." The deputy chief of security quickly left the room. Michael Garibaldi drummed his fingers on the tabletop, looking over his employees' accounts over and over again. Surely he had to know something about what was going on. "Mr. Garibaldi, am I disturbing you?" "What? Lord Baal?" Garibaldi resisted the urge to roll his eyes in resignation, keeping to the bounds of politeness. "Forgive me, but this is a rather inappropriate time, unless you have something particularly urgent." "Oh, I understand, I suppose," he smiled, "that Commander Sinclair has disappeared, and you are now looking for him. Where from? Do you know something?" "I think so." The ambassador nodded. "About an hour ago I saw 2 men dragging him into one of the cabins on the 6th level." "Damn! Ivanova. Michael immediately jumped up, activating the communicator. Ivanova is listening. This is Garibaldi. I think I know where the commander is. Level 6. I'm heading there. Send a support team after me. I'll do it. Lord Baal, I hope you're right. But after that, I'd like to clarify the question of how you always end up in the right places. I'm just taking a walk, Mr. Garibaldi. Just taking a walk. The ambassador smiled and watched the man running out into the corridor. Lord Baal. Sinclair thoughtfully twirled one of the pawns in his fingers, then made a move. Would you mind dispelling my curiosity? If it is within my power, Commander. The ambassador answered with a smile, stroking his beard and looking at the position of the pieces on the board. I don't know what this is. The man gestured around the darkness that had thickened around their table. But it's definitely not Babylon 5. I'm not even sure if this place is real or if I'm just imagining it. Under the influence of drugs or something? And what is your question? How did you end up here? The ways of the Lord are mysterious. Whose paths? Sinclair dropped the knight he was preparing to move in surprise. Well, it's an Earth proverb. I found it when I was studying your culture. Baal leaned back in his chair casually. A very apt definition, by the way. It's just a pity I couldn't find the author's name. Ahem. The commander sat frowning, and it was clear from his face that he felt that something was wrong with this whole situation, that he was clearly being subtly mocked, but he couldn't understand why. And yet, I would like to hear a slightly more detailed answer. We had an appointment, and when I didn't find you there, I just decided to look for you. By the way, it's your move, Commander. The ambassador smiled and pointed with his gaze at the Black Queen practically in the middle of the board. And you're in check. Sinclair thought, looking at the board. Everything was too unreal, and even though he had good reason to suspect that it was the culprit, it also allowed him to consider the go-old ambassador to be just a hallucination, with a fair degree of certainty. Lord Baal. Returning to our previous conversation after the incident with Mr. Ironheart. Yes? Are you interested in something? Well, the representatives of the Psi Corps showed obvious concern and interest in your participation in what was happening, although they tried not to show it openly. But I know people like Bester too well to allow myself to be mistaken about them. I suppose one can understand them in some ways. Your person made him very wary. Tell me, Lord Baal. Sinclair hesitated. Are you a telepath? It depends on what you mean by this term. In what sense? Method or concept, Commander. Baal smiled, making a move. If you mean method, then no. My abilities are based on fundamentally different principles than the abilities of Mr. Bester and his colleagues. But if we talk about the very concept of telepathy, as the ability to mentally communicate at a distance, read other people's thoughts and so on, then yes, I believe that I can be called a telepath. The go-old ambassador glanced at the chessboard and, nodding with satisfaction, took a glass of wine out of thin air and took a sip, gesturing for his interlocutor to move. But you understand. You are the first ambassador who is also, a telepath. The Psi Corps will not be able to remain on the sidelines seeing such... Such a threat, you mean? Baal nodded understandingly. Yes, that's right. Sinclair froze over the board for a second, but then still risked moving his own queen forward. I suppose they'll have to live with it somehow. As I told you, Commander. Baal leaned forward, smiling broadly. The empire I represent does not seek to start armed conflicts with anyone. But if someone decides to declare war on us, I'll be happy to listen to them. Don't underestimate a potential enemy. That's a damned wise idea, Commander. The man stood up and gave Sinclair a short bow, pointing a finger at the board. You're checkmated. Thank you for a great game and a pleasant conversation. I have no doubt we can do it again sometime. Only in... Baal glanced around at the still darkness surrounding them, a more welcoming interior. Sinclair only had time to look down at the arrangement of the pieces on the board and understand that, indeed, his king simply had nowhere to hide from Baal's attack. When his interlocutor quietly disappeared into the surrounding darkness, and from somewhere in the distance the commander heard Garibaldi's voice, familiar to him, giving some orders and calling him